What's up, party people, and welcome to Countdown to Classic. This is a podcast that educates, informs, and gossips about World of Warcraft Classic. Each week we discuss the news, hot button issues, and content of the highly anticipated Classic servers. I'm your host, Josh Corbett, and this is a show where it's not my opinion on World of Warcraft that counts, but yours. If you're new to the show, Countdown to Classic goes through your expert input on everything relating to the sure-to-be amazing World of Warcraft Classic. Well, it's been quite a couple of weeks for me as I went all the way to Blizzcon and back again. And now that I'm back home in sunny Sydney, the show can get back to doing what it does best, and that's chatting with all of you, the amazing World of Warcraft Classic community. If you're not aware, the show will be coming out once a week from now on, and I'll do all I can to keep that publication date around about this time of the week. But if it is late by a day or two, then please do bear with me. You'll certainly get your fix of Countdown eventually. So I was waiting until I was back at my podcasting battle station at home before bringing you an in-depth commentary on everything we saw and heard regarding Classic at BlizzCon. And luckily today is that day. I took a whole heap of listener calls over the weekend, and in this episode, you'll be hearing 3 of them. I really wanted to gather as many opinions as I could to weigh in on all the info that we got from the Classic team during BlizzCon. And so, the first 2 calls you'll hear today are back-to-back group calls, being about 90 minutes and 40 minutes long respectively, which talk about the demo, the panels, sharding, loot trading, and all of that jazz. After that, you'll hear a great call from listener MooseTheDog that provides some in-depth commentary on the loot trading situation and some alternative suggestions, which was also a lot of fun. As per usual, if you are enjoying these in-depth conversations that Countdown to Classic brings you on a regular basis, please do visit the show's Patreon page to see how you can help support Countdown to Classic to continue to bring you more of the content that you're now so used to hearing on the show. Alternatively, you can also help the show out by mentioning the show to a friend, perhaps in-game. Talk about it where you hear things on Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, wherever you're actively discussing things. Follow me on Twitch at Countdown to Classic. I'm streaming a little bit more these days. Or leave the show a review on iTunes. If you want to hit me up with some feedback or submit a memory lane or anger management of your own, you can always get me at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com as well. And also, if you can't get enough of me for some reason, then please do check out my other podcast, The Cinephiles. That's SINNERFILES.com if you haven't already, for some great comedic takes on all of your favorite movies. We've been on hiatus for about the past 3 weeks or so while I've been on holiday, but we'll come roaring back with Total Recall and Good Will Hunting in the next week or so. So please do look out for those ones. But with all that said, let's get straight to these listener calls in Calling Countdown. Hello, and I've got even more Countdown to Classic listeners on the line again in yet another Countdown to Classic group call, and I'm so thankful for having everyone here. You've all come together at the last second, and I just want to run through you all one by one and say a big welcome to FredMonroe once again. You're racking up the appearances. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much for having me.
No, my pleasure, mate. Always a great call to have you in on it. So next we've got NostalgiaDad, your second time on the show, I believe. How are you?
Good. Long time, man.
It's been a few months for sure. Good to hear from you. And one of my favorites, PWJ. What's up, man? How are you?
Hey, what's going on, man? I'm doing great.
Good to hear, mate. Now, you've come off a night shift and you must be very tired, but you're pulling through for the show, and I appreciate that. And finally, we have a Countdown to Classic first timer, Vel. How you going?
Good, man. Like I said, I'm glad to be here, and new to the Discord, new to your podcast, but I've been really just tearing through them, really enjoying the content. So thanks a lot.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much for jumping on board and for listening. Now, what we're doing today, everyone, is on this particular episode, we're covering everything BlizzCon, everything demo, and just getting a cross-section of opinions from the community about what they've gone through over the last week or so. Now, there was another call on this episode. By the time you're hearing this, I'm not sure if I played this call first or second, but either way, you're getting two group calls on this topic, and you would have heard by now a multitude of varying opinions and unique takes on what Blizzard has presented to us over the last week or so. So let's get started with this group. And FredMonroe, I'm going to start with you because you strike me as the kind of person who would have picked this demo apart. Now, I'm not sure if you had a virtual ticket or not. Let us know if you did. But my question is, A, did you play the demo? And B, even if you did or didn't play the demo, what have been your takeaways from the gameplay and what's in there and what isn't in there?
Right. Well, I did get the chance to actually play around the demo. But I don't know. I mean, I think ultimately with the demo, what we really saw even stressed at BlizzCon was, it was very much a work in progress. So I didn't really take all that much away from the demo. There's some mechanics that people are worried about, like sharding, and there's of course a lot of discussion about that. But I mean, I think it was a good sign. But really, I think ultimately it's still a work in progress, so we can't be too hard on it.
All right. Now, NostalgiaDad, is that the point of view that you've taken? A lot of people are somewhat split on this one, and FredMonroe has just said, let's not be too hard on them. It's very much so a demo. We shouldn't take this as being anything close to completion. Is that your frame of mind, or were you a bit harsher on the demo that we were presented with, or were you just having fun?
So I didn't get to play the demo. I was stuck at a work event all day that day. And I would say I started off a bit on the harsher side. I came in seeing the sharding and the 200% spell crit and all of these other things, the mana regen. And I kind of raged a little bit. I was pretty angry. And then over time, after the talk the next day and after them talking about it's a work in progress, please don't judge us by this, we're going to change these things. It really sort of calmed me down a little bit, brought me a bit off the edge, if you will. And then I sort of started thinking about some of these other things that at first I wasn't that concerned about, but I've since become more concerned about. And then other things that were the opposite direction. So I think I'm kind of more on the let's wait and see to judge, but I'm cautiously optimistic. I have some things that I'm a bit leery of.
All right, if I can just push you a little bit further there, what are a couple of those things that you're wary of so far?
Loot trading and the possibility of that being abused, progressive itemization for things like PvP weapons that stats change later on in the game, some of the itemization of, like, say, the Major Domo chest that got implemented later. So some of these things really, I think, I'm a bit concerned about. But we'll see. The sharding, I think I've sort of come around a little bit on it, as long as they do it the way they claim they're going to do it. But we'll see. All
right. We'll definitely get into the nitty gritty on some of those points, throughout the duration of this call. Now, PWJ, if I can turn to you, if we would just start off sort of very broadly. You've heard a couple of opinions now. Where did you lie? Did you fall in the positive or negative camp or the to be determined camp?
I was pretty nervous when I was watching live, honestly. But after hearing what they had to say at BlizzCon, I'm feeling very, very optimistic right now. I think we heard a lot of really good things. They hit on a couple keynotes that I thought were really important, and it cleared up a bunch of stuff for us. So even though there's a couple things like that loot trading, I agree, and potentially sharding, I still think we got a lot of really good news, and it's kind of helped put my mind at ease in terms of Classic. I think they're taking it in the right direction.
All right, Vel, let us know if you played the demo, and then also flowing on from that, whether you played or not. Again, broadly, did you take a positive or negative take from what you saw and heard? And also, we've now heard a few of the guys mention that their concerns were very much so alleviated by the words that we heard on stage from the Classic team and also Ian Hazzikostas on day 2 of BlizzCon. And that's been something that I've heard as somewhat of a prevailing theme from people's opinions over the last week or so, is that, oh, thank God they told us that, because people were quite worried after day 1. Did you ride that emotional train as well?
Not really. To be honest with you, I bought the virtual ticket in order to play the demo. And when I got on there, I got so excited about just being in the game that, I'm a bit of I don't like to waste time. So it's really hard for me to like play a demo and know I'm not going to play that character long term. So I started doing a lot of actual personal planning for how I want to prepare for Classic. I mean, literally scouring through the database, taking notes on what I want to do, paths I want to take, kind of bringing back, reconnecting with old friends who I used to play with. And then as far as some of the hot topics, like I'm a big fan of Tips Out. I'm sure you guys all know him. I think he's a great content creator, and I've watched a couple of his videos. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I'm more of a glass half full kind of guy. They can deliver a product to me that's, in a lot of people's opinions, half-ass, and I think I'd be okay with it because I'm just excited to play, like, and reconnect with my friends. The biggest thing to me is the community, and so long as that isn't lost, I think that's going to be a big win.
Well, if I can add a follow-up question from that one for you, Vel. Tips was obviously one of a number of content creators that were pumping out videos and reactions during BlizzCon over what we got at the time and giving their thoughts on what we were being told as well. And Tips is one of the people who has actually had a quite a large reaction to the sharding issue, and he sent out a tweet saying that, quite frankly, if sharding is in the game in any way, shape or form, he won't play Classic. Now, is that an opinion that you would share with him, or do you think that there's certainly, a point where you'll still happily accept sharding in some form?
Absolutely. I saw that video and he was tired. His first time he said, I think it was a bit out of his mind, and he's repositioned himself into a more reasonable perception of it. I think he's now kind of a stance that if it's sharding past starting zones first week or two, he won't be happy with it. And he might actually delay starting the game until it's taken out of Classic is kind of what he's sitting at now. And on a lighter topic, I have to say this. I was watching one of his videos and my wife was in the room and he said sharding and she swore to God she heard sharting and she about lost herself. It was awesome.
A lot of people go through that. Well, I watched Tips's video the day after he made that tweet, and he actually addressed it and said, look, a lot of you think I'm overreacting, and here's my take now that I'm not so tired. And he doubled down on it and he said, yes, I'm still saying that. Absolutely. If sharding is in the game, I will not play. So I thought it was interesting that he didn't back down from that tweet, and hey, his position is out there. So maybe some other players feel the same way. The sharding was a really controversial issue, so we'll see where that takes us. But we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah, sorry, go for it.
Yeah, I agree. And that was the second time he addressed it. He has a third video that he's really sensed that one where he takes the secondary position about he might not play the game right at launch if it's shardings in the game. If it's a long-term thing, he really might just play the hard line. Like I said, I'm a glass half full guy. I would be in the same boat to a degree. But I absolutely think that some kind of a resolution for the massive amount of tourists and people who are going to be logging in on day one is necessary. And I do think that sharding is the lesser of all the evils, in my opinion.
All right. Well, look, we might as well get into it now while we're talking about it. So I'll turn back to you, FredMonroe, and ask for your opinion on this one. Now, we just heard about the lesser of a few evils, and that's something that I talked about yesterday, in a podcast. I was a guest on, For Azeroth, just yesterday with Jocelyn and Manny, and I went into a bit of a rant about sharding, and I'm dying to know, all of your opinions on this. And I've mentioned, as a lot of people have talked about online on Reddit and the forums and things like this, that we're quite aware that Blizzard was kind of somewhat stuck between a rock and a hard place. It was, as I put it, it was lose, 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 lose with the 3 or 4 options that they had in lieu of sharding. So you had choices like, well, do we do sharding? Do we do queuing like it was back in the day? Do we increase the realm population and just throw in dynamic respawns? And all of them had their kind of pros and cons, but all of them definitely had standout cons. So I'm not happy with sharding being the selection that they went with. I personally would just prefer queues, but then I never sat in a 2-hour queue back in the day. What was your thoughts on sharding being in the game, albeit perhaps for a limited time? And then what do you think the effect will be if it's there?
Right. So just to go over the options, the first option is sharding, where basically you have multiple people playing all on the same server. However, there's like multiple instances of that same server, so you won't actually see someone else who's like right next to you potentially, because it's as if they're on another server, even though they're not. The second option is, of course, dynamic respawns, which if you played on like Elysium or the Stars or even Northdale, you're going to be very familiar with that. And basically that has, mobs and items and stuff like that spawning at an increased rate, relative to the amount of players in the area. The third option, as you went over, was queuing. So, you only let, 2,500 people on a server at a time, which is how it works back in Classic. And I'd say the fourth option, which is the one I favor the most, is you make multiple instances of the same server. So for example, you can have a server called Illidan 1, a server called Illidan 2, a server called Illidan 3, and so on. And basically at the end of, a month, all those servers merge together into one Illidan server. So I think those are like the four options that really are available to them. I understand, why you might want to do dynamic respawns, because that requires a lot of work, requires a lot of effort. And you end up with like sort of a non-Blizz-like product. If you've played on Elysium or, the Saurius, you'll know that when you're in these early starting zones, particularly like in a mine or something, mobs will literally respawn the second you kill them, and you become like trapped in there, which is something that would really never happen when you're actually playing in vanilla. I think the issue with sharding is very real though, because you end up with the situation where while you're like technically on the same server, you can just kind of like phase in and out, and all of a sudden it feels like you're on a different server. All the people you played with, all the people you leveled with, you'll have no opportunity to actually like see them or play with them again unless you add them to your friends list and invite them to a group or something. I think that is a real issue. But again, the one I would favor the most really is sort of like sharding, except you do it officially through different servers, like in Illidan 1, Illidan 2, Illidan 3. And basically, those would be, if you did sharding, what the shards would have been. It's just, you make it officially new servers at the start. And then once like, the whole tourist effect and everyone rushing to the North Shard Valley or all the starting zones, once that's all sort of dealt with, maybe like a few weeks or a month in, then you can just merge all the servers together and boom, no problem. So that'd be my opinion on it.
Okay. Now, NostalgiaDad, where do you lie on this one? Because as I've said, I'm of the opinion that I will happily grit my teeth and, bear this sharding if it is just the first few weeks of the game in the starting zones. As I've said, I don't, take the hardline stance that some people have taken and say, if it's in the game, then I'm out. I won't play. Are you sort of that extreme stance, or are you, again, you're quite happy to sort of, just roll your eyes and deal with it? Or you might even be of the opinion that sharding's a good thing. Where are you on this one?
So I think in this case, I'm sort of a in between. So I was very much anti-sharding at first, and I've come to think that of the options of dynamic respawns, sharding, multiple servers, which involves a huge influx in monetary investment on their end that I don't think they're going to put in. I think sharding may be the lesser of two evils. However, with that said, what Fred was talking about, I actually sort of am in line with that, but I think it all depends on what the server size is going to be, because they sort of dodged that question several times now about what the server size is going to be. And I get the feeling that they saw the popularity of these larger private servers, and I'm kind of hoping they don't go in that 10, 15K size, but I would hope that maybe if they decided to go with a larger size, like say 4,500 or something, that maybe we could have a mix in which we say had Illidan 1, Illidan 2, Illidan 3, and the server pops were 1,000 to 1,500, 1,000 to 1,500, 1,000 to 1,500, and then merge them later. You would still have issues of overpopulation in that beginning section when you're talking about server queues, et cetera, and people camping spawns for mobs and things like that. I really don't think dynamic respawns is the way to go there, but I think with a server split and then possibly sharding for like a week or something, then I'm okay with that. My only other issue with the multiple server option is that, especially a month out, there's going to be people who are going to be in Upper Blackrock Spire within a month. I know that sounds crazy, but I plan to take a week off from work and pound through all the way to 60 as fast as I can. Mm-hmm. So I'm actually going to be hopefully done and at 60 by, week 2, week 3 at the latest. And so that might be harder to do, find groups, find things like that. If other people are sharding and I haven't had a chance to form those relationships with people on the way up. So I think the separate server option is a good option. My only concern is what is the final server size going to be to make that work?
PWJ, if I can turn to you for your take on this. Now, we just heard from NostalgiaDad that, dynamic respawns may not be the way to go either. And as we've talked about, it was a tough choice for Blizzard because all of them had their negatives. Now, the funny thing that I've noticed is that prior to the demo coming out, I thought that the community was somewhat pro dynamic respawns in that the private server players sort of never seemed to kick up much of a stink about it. Now that the demo's dropped, I'm hearing more and more that, yeah, we got sharding, but, at least it's better than dynamic respawns. It seems like there's been a bit of a turn. And I'm just going by from what I've read. Don't get me wrong. This might not be the case at all, but it feels to me like people are saying, I'm glad they didn't go with dynamic respawns. That would have been the wrong way to go. But what choice would you have made of the options they had? We're talking they went with sharding. Are you pro sharding? Do you think they should have gone larger realms with dynamic respawns? Do you think they should have gone with queues? Where do you lie on this one?
Honestly, Josh, people are weird, man. People are talking about dynamic respawns. K3 had dynamic respawns, and it was kind of abused by players, and people were able to farm mobs over and over and level faster than anyone else. So it came with its downsides too. So if people saw that, they'd be like, the dynamic respawns are stupid. We should have just gone with sharding, blah, blah, blah. You can never win. However, something Ian Hazukosa said, though, the fact that there should only be one Lord Kazakh on any server gave me a lot of hope. Like, if there's sharding in Mulgore for the first 10, 15 levels, whatever, that's fine. The things I was worried about was endgame at level 60. If they were going to split up world bosses into several shards so that a couple guilds can get them. No, that's not what vanilla is about. So I was really concerned, but when Ian Hazukosa said that, it gave me a lot of hope. I can deal with sharding off at the start of the game. It'll make things smoother. I already have lined up a guild, and I know that if I invite my friends, I'll be able to level with them regardless. So I'm not too concerned about it early game. It was the later game, and I'm glad that Ian was able to address that in their Q&A at BlizzCon. So I'm feeling better about it.
Okay, well, on that point, I'll turn to you, Vel. Now, if we did get sharding in mid-game content, in end-game content, a lot of people are suggesting, including myself, that that's the line. We might be willing to accept early-game content, starting zones and whatnot through all the chaos. If you got a shard, then shard. Just, keep it limited. And that was addressed as a possibility. However, if they did decide to go with a situation where, could you imagine, you're sitting there at the opening of the AQ gates on your server, you're so excited, and it's been sharded, and there's not that many people around. What would you think of that?
Don't even joke like that, Josh. That's awful. That's absolutely what I'm
That's a nightmare.
terrified of. Yeah, I mean, if I saw it like in Mulgore, whatever, and if it happened a little bit towards Townville, South Shore, I'd be like, what the fuck? Okay. But if it's still happening by like the time you're hitting Western and Eastern Plate lands and you're still seeing sharding, then I'm going to be really concerned. Not to mention, Molten Core opening and guilds are getting sharded, so there's no fighting at the gates. That would be really
that's the thing. You're talking about Blackwing Lair, Molten Core, and people heading off to raid, and then you're talking about people trying to gank raiders and the fighting inside Blackrock Mountain and priests mind controlling people into the lava and all this like fun, crazy PvP stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would all be gone with sharding, right? Yeah. There's a really great video of a dueling event that happened on one of the classic demo servers, and they had this video of the guy who was standing there, and he could only see 2 or 3 people. And then once he joined a group, you saw an entire raid worth of people standing there while they were dueling. And so there's events like that, or level 1 Hogger raids that you're going to miss. Those things are a little concerning for me.
That was taken from the demo, the BlizzCon demo?
Yeah.
I think that's a special case because you have people on the BlizzCon floor that only have a certain amount of time to hit that demo. They're wasting their time at BlizzCon to spend that demo. So I wouldn't be surprised if the scaling was upped in order for them to get their time in, not to mention the people at home that paid the virtual ticket, blah, 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 blah. So
they removed the time though, didn't they?
They did.
I'm
eventually.
not sure of the specifics, but I wouldn't take the demo as like a hard concrete fucking evidence of how it's going to be on the actual
Well,
I think that may have been a
NostalgiaDad,
special occasion.
I think you linked that video in the Discord, and I did see that one, and that was jaw-dropping. I was really, really surprised to see that, and that was sort of the epitome of a horrible example of sharding and why it's such an odd thing. But it's definitely something that if listeners, you haven't seen that video, jump in the Countdown to Classic Discord and have a search around for that one, or just Google it, because it was quite strange to see. Vel, did you sort of concur with the guys on this one that maybe if we got sharding towards the over the halfway mark of the game, that it might be a bit more of an issue?
Absolutely. And I wanted to say thanks to NostalgiaDad for in the Discord, which if anyone's not in the Discord for Countdown to Classic, you should really join it. There's a huge group of amazing people chatting every day at length about all kinds of different topics. And NostalgiaDad and I kind of went back and forth about it when he was more hyper anti-sharding. And he had a very strong opinion. Good for you, man. I'm glad you had that opinion. It helped me to flesh out mine, and to really put like some thought behind my ideas. I like to think that I was a little bit of the persuasion for you to be a little bit more.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say you were, because I came in pretty hot on that subject, and I've sort of, I kind of toned down, but then that video kind of got me moving the other direction a little bit. So I don't know.
Yeah. And you know, this is one thing I would say is I feel like any community as large as the classic WoW community. I mean, I feel it's large. I'm part of it, right? Everything feels huge when you're part of it. But we're very passionate, even if we're not as large as we think we are. When you have a community like that, and they have something that even triggers them a little bit, they go to extremes, right? And so they think about AQ opening gate ceremony, like, oh my God, that would actually be horrific. And I would have been concerned about that as an option before BlizzCon, but after we had Ian come on stage, as well as numerous devs, all these different media panels, every single one of them, I got the exact same feel from it, is they actually care about the game, what the community wants, how they want to play it, and what they're going to deliver to us. And they know that would break it. That would just totally ruin so many amazing experiences of people, and they would just steal it from. So I don't think that they will ever do that.
Okay. Now, FredMonroe, if I can turn to you just to tie off this topic of sharding, and we'll get you to bring it on home. Now, one point that Vel just brought up that I've really it's somewhat rubbed me the wrong way. Now, I want to preface what I'm about to say. I know why Blizzard has gone with the choice of sharding. I get it from a technical aspect. They've told us they don't want to devote, sort of, how do I say this, too much work or resources to Classic, and maybe sharding is the easiest choice for them. I also appreciate that it's maybe the, just the easiest solution to that, crazy chaotic start of the game when everyone's in the same zone and blah, blah, blah. However, we've been sold Classic with one particular tagline over the last 12 months, and some people somewhat forget this, but it's something that stuck high in my mind, and that is that line of, we want to re-deliver the vanilla experience. It's all about the vanilla experience. We heard those words from J. Allen Brack in the initial announcement. We've heard those words from Ian Hazzikostas in various interviews, the few interviews that we got over the last year. And those are words that are really ringing in my head. And then people say, oh, look, we met the team at BlizzCon. They clearly love Classic. Oh, these guys are great. They're all about the Classic experience. It's going to be fantastic. And then, without sort of telling us, they just drop sharding on us. Then we notice sharding, there's a backlash, and then they feel the need to address it on day 2. So I feel that sharding goes against the concept of the vanilla experience. So it seems like they're pulling in one direction and pushing in the other with this, hey guys, we're with you, we love vanilla. Now, in saying that, did you pick up on that at all? Did you have any particular issue with them asking us to swallow the bitter pill of sharding while also telling us they love Classic? Or do you think it's necessary and Josh, you should get over it?
Well, I will say this, Josh, and I don't remember what video it was or when it was actually said, but I want to say it was, fuck, I don't remember. Anyways, they mentioned that they want to recreate the experience of Classic, but they specifically said, we do not want to recreate the experience of Classic launch. They explicitly said that a couple times, I think, actually.
Right.
And I think that's important because I didn't play at the launch. I got into the game a little bit after it started. But from what I've seen online and read about online, fuck no, I don't want to be a part of that. That sounded like horrifically not a fun experience. And I think it would turn off a lot of people who could be good players, long-term players in the community because they don't want to deal with it. Or if they did deal with it, they don't want to be part of it long-term.
I was just going to say 14 years later, we don't have the patience to sit in a queue for 4 hours and wait to log into a video game to grind boars. You know what I mean? So I get the necessity, the evil necessity of sharding in a short term, which is why I've sort of softened it. I think, if it's there for like 2 weeks, okay, I'm okay with that.
Yep. No, I agree with you.
Absolutely.
I'm totally, if it's short term, then so be it.
I think Blizzard's kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place because they had to deal with Diablo 3 with that Error 37 login message for people. They had their WoD launch. That was a disaster. And they just had to make a decision. Are we going to have another potential disaster launch day like that? Or are we just going to suck it up and have sharding and just make it work the first time around? And they just had to make the choice and they just went with the safer bet, I guess.
Yep.
I'm happy they did personally. And Josh, sorry, but I didn't get a chance to, I have a couple notes I wanted to talk about.
Go for it.
Options at this school. So I want to say that I do think sharding is the lesser of the evils, and I say that for a number of reasons, but to talk about, a topic that I haven't heard about that FredMonroe brought up about this Illithid 1, 2, and 3, like a static sharding almost, if you will, for a couple of weeks. That's interesting. I've not heard it. When I first heard him say it, it sounded great. It sounded like the better option. But when I think about it, what would you think if you were that player that got stuck on Illidan 2, and it just so happened that all of the tourists were on Illidan 2. And so like after a week, you're just like fucking solo with 500 players at the server.
Yeah,
it'd be brutal.
It's a fair point.
Or it'd be great. It'd be one or the other. Either you like it because you can grind out mobs and quests like no one's business, or it would suck because you can't make any connections. Both are bad in my opinion.
Yeah, you could grind your way all the way to 60 really fast if there's no competition for mobs and spawns, right? Which would then allow you to get to the higher level zones faster, which would allow you to, say, get Black Lotus farms, or, you can build stacks of dream foil, or, fires. You could really build up a bank ahead of time that might maybe, be unfair to the players on the other semi-permanent shards.
Exactly.
Or you might just get bummed out and be like, yo, no one's playing this fucking game. Look around me. I'm going to quit. No one's playing
Exactly. So it's either unfair one way or the other.
And that's why I don't like the static idea. I think sharding, the dynamic aspect of it. And another thing, people mentioned that you won't be able to meet the people in the starting zones. But for instance, NostalgiaDad, you're taking a week off work. You're going to grind out 60 as fast as you can. If you miss those relationships, those highs and buys of a quick group, they're not going to be at 60 with you anyways when you hit there. You're going to slash who on your server, and you're going to figure out who's 60. You're going to contact them. You're going to make groups. You start farming your biz. Those are the people you're going to start to develop relationships with, and maybe along the way you might meet a couple of other diehards, right? But those are the people you're going to talk to. And the last thing I want to say is about the whole dynamic respawns. I've played on some of the private servers. I didn't experience them at launch, but I did experience them to a degree at some leveling stages. And I didn't even realize this was going on and the benefit that I missed out on. But I've watched a video from Stay Safe, actually. He talks about leveling groups and the ideal leveling group size. And I was like, that's the stupidest concept I've ever heard of. Why would you want a group? You get reduced experience. But when mobs respawn instantaneously with 5 people, you can hit 60 in 3 days played. It's ridiculously fast just by grinding mobs.
That's what I was talking about, the dynamic respawns.
And that's what I think would be horrible. This is coming from me, and I don't want to blow my cover, and I'm not sure how you guys are going to feel about this, but when I play Classic, I'm going to play Classic a different way than I played back in the day. I like to increase my challenges when I play games, especially games I've played before, and I'm actually looking to try my hand at multi-boxing. Now, if you think, as a multi-boxer, if I had 5 accounts or 2 accounts or 3 accounts, I would be fucking all on board about dynamic respawning. That would be the fastest, easiest way for me to level. No, I still don't want that. I don't think it's fair. I think it's a shitty way to play.
So you're the guy that plays Dark Souls with his feet.
I've never played that. No, I'm actually just starting to dabble in it. I've spent like a week trying to figure out software, man. It's a learning experience to say the least.
Fair enough. Look, I'll just end with one last thing on my end. The reason that I've been saying, look, if I had to, gun to my head, if I had to pick one of these, evils that we call them, the reason I've been skewing towards queue times is that, playing in Australia back in the day, I never experienced any of those horridly long queue times. So I completely appreciate that I'm spoilt in a way, and that the longest queue I ever sat in was like 20 minutes to log in 2006. Do you know what I mean? So yes, it's and it's really easy for me to sit here and be like, I want queues because they're not that bad. I didn't feel the pain that some of you went through of waiting 2 hours to get into the game. So I do appreciate that in 2018, people wouldn't stand for that either. So again, why that might make sharding look a little bit better to some people. So I just wanted to throw that in there. But moving on, Fred, I'll come back to you. And we got told a whole bunch of other stuff at BlizzCon. Obviously, sharding was something that sort of a lot of people were mainly talking about, but there was also things like loot trading and, the scheduled timetable, even though we didn't get any specific dates, the phases in which they will be releasing content to us. Of the other big bits of information that we got from BlizzCon, is there anything else that irked you or that you liked or that you really felt the need to go on a bit of a rant about?
Sure. I'm a bit worried about when they talked about how they didn't have data from their database prior to 1.12. It was like very, very loose and, all over the place. Because to me, what that means is, hey guys, there's not going to be any sort of progressive itemization because we just don't have that data. And I think that's going to be a bit of an issue. Obviously, there's going to be some, items which are gated. Like they said, they were going to gate the tier 0.5. And then, of course, the PvP and, the gear from raids is going to be gated. But we're going to have Dire Maul out release. And we're going to have every single updated item, it sounds like, for a bunch of the dungeons. And, if you're not that too familiar with, how the progressive itemization works on private servers, typically like the best items, which were later added, like even in like 1.11, like some items that were added to Stratholme and Skullomance, they can be better than what you can get in Molten Core and even better than what you can get in BWL. So just as an example, there's a level 52 epic chest plate that drops from the arena in Blackrock Depths. It's called the Savage Gladiator's Chain. And prior to its item update, it's like this really sort of weird like shaman tank item because it gives plus 20 defense skill and it's a male chest piece. But it gets updated to give 2% crit and then give like 13 agility, 13 stamina, 13 strength, something like that. And that is the best Fury Warrior chest piece until AQ. That's a level 52 item dropping from Blackrock Depths Arena, which is like a level 54 dungeon. And that's better than anything they can get until AQ. Like this is a problem, I think. And unfortunately, it seems like Blizzard sort of said, look, we don't have the pre-1.12 stuff. So we're going to have all the items out release. It's definitely going to make, both BWL and MC and Oni, all three of those are going to be way easier than they were earlier. And also it's going to provide this heavy disincentive towards running them, if you're like some hardcore players trying to gear up and get the best gear possible. That said, it's not going to be so bad because again, it's just the earlier dungeons which it really affects. So if you're some hardcore player, AQ is still going to be somewhat of a challenge. Nax obviously still going to be a challenge as well because all the gear have been updated by then. But, a lot of people really do play the earlier content. That's all they stick in. And if they're trying to get like a real Blizz-like, experience where it's difficult, they're going to find the lack of progressive itemization and they're going to find what seems to be no changes to, 1.12 talents where like most classes are significantly stronger, than they were, when that was command progression. They're going to find that content just from a mechanic standpoint, not to mention if they are more skilled players or something, way easier than it actually was to do in progression back in the day in vanilla. So that's the one thing about the panel that I didn't really like. But, again, they took some sort of attempt to do a progressive release schedule. And, perhaps it's not the most ideal progressive release schedule, but it's still so much better than nothing.
Well, while I've got you on a roll, just in regards to progressive itemization and the relationship between the scheduled release, a lot of people have been raising an eyebrow, including myself, over things like, we got Dire Maul sitting there in phase 1. What are your thoughts on Dire Maul being there upon release? I'm pretty sure it was, please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure it was saying that there was going to be there on release, and also how the items in Dire Maul might affect things, and if there's any other specific items in Dire Maul that you think might skew things the wrong way.
Well, I think every single class like that is a raid spec has BIS items, pre-read BIS items that come out in Dire Maul. So I know, for example, for hunters, they have backwood helm and they have a belt, which are just super good. But yeah, I think the issue really is, that, well, I think the main issue with Dire Maul, there's the items problem, but another thing they said is they're not going to make any changes. And when I hear that, I hear, oh shoot, the changes that we got on Nostalrius and Elysium and Northdale, where they massively nerfed the gold farm. Basically, they reduced the rate at which some items drop. They also reduced the vendor value of some items for the mage. And they also gave King Gordok a new ability so that he could fight back against the solo hunter tribute run. I don't think those changes are going to be in Dire Maul. And that's going to be a big issue for the gold economy on the server. We're going to have this huge gold inflation because these 2 gold farms are so much better than any other gold farm that any other character can do. And so that's something that also really worries me about Dire Maul being out in releases. Right away, we're going to have these hardcore people who are grinding out these amazing gold farms. And I think like the value of gold is really, there's going to be this huge inflationary event that's going to happen on servers. So that's that. I'm also really worried about that, about Dire Maul being on release. All
right. I think I heard, was that you, PWJ, piping up maybe in agreement with some of those points?
I actually wanted to jump in real quick.
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry. Go for it.
So I was able to, I actually was contacted by some friends that I played in Classic with, like the original vanilla a year and a half, 2 years ago. And they were like, hey, there's these private server things. I'm like, what the fuck's a private server? That sounds silly to me. Anyway, they checked it out. They quit when I was at 30. I pushed through to 60. I met a whole new group of friends, had a great time. And I have to say this, that in retail vanilla, I was what you would have called a goblin in retail vanilla. I almost hit gold cap in retail vanilla. I didn't know it until after they released the gold cap numbers. But the market on private servers was so much different. Because I think a number of reasons. One, it was massive server size, right? And 2, most people who were playing knew what the fuck they were doing. Like, they weren't passive players logging on from time to time, spending their gold willy-nilly. So you weren't able to take advantage of that. So things that people are used to, prices that they're used to from these private servers, y'all are about to have a real rude awakening as to how pricing used to be. It was far, 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 far different.
Absolutely.
It took me so much effort on private servers to try to make gold through the auction house and different farms I used to do. So much. The only way to do it was to actually farm physical gold. That was the most efficient way, which was time, so much time. So I'm actually looking forward to that. And I think, Fred, that it'll kind of balance itself out. You were talking about how people getting 60 quickly to get the gold. The other thing is there's no gold on a server until people farm the gold. Like, Blizzard doesn't generate gold for people to use. It has to be generated and then go into circulation. And as people farm more gold goes into circulation. So inflation happens over time no matter what. It depends on how long a server has been out. That's how it's always been.
Just to be clear, the gold that's farmed through DM is actually like through pure gold farm. Like the tribute run, none of that stuff is sold on the auction house. That's all vendored basically, besides some of the potions. And same with the mage farm. The mage does farm some trade materials, but a lot of the materials are actually these gray vendor item trash.
Yeah.
So it's pure gold generation, and it's a bit of a problem when you have it early on. Because if that's at the very beginning, then the price of all trade goods is going to skyrocket, and basically gold's going to become like this big non-factor for a lot of players. Like, you usually have to scrimp and save to get your mounts, but if there's these guys who are level 60 who are actually generating a shit ton of gold and they can use that to inflate prices on the auction house, it's going to be much easier for you to play the game and get gold, which you might say is a good thing. Oh, cool, I'll be able to get my mount, but that's not going to be a classic experience.
Well, it's also going to frustrate the new players too, right? Because you have these newer players who are not going to know shit about anything, right? And so you'll have these overly inflated prices for fire pots or devil sword leggings or whatever. And, the price is inflated because of all the farming, and these new players won't know what the hell they're doing. They'll get frustrated and maybe quit or do other things. So, my concern, just to kind of cut back, I wanted to interject really quick, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
So we were talking about the classic WoW release, and there's been this idea of splitting up the release that they came up with. And I've seen a couple people, I think Alex Central did, I think a couple other guys did, but this idea of maybe splitting things up. And I think maybe doing 6 releases instead of the 4 that they came up with. So I just pulled up the list that Alex came up with. And I think there's been a few other guys that have floated the same idea, but his idea was Molten Core, Onyxia, Maraudon, Gorobashi Arena, STV fishing event, and an 8 debuff in the first one. The Dire Maul, Kazakh, Azuragos, updated Molten Core loot in number 2, Blackwing Lair, BG's, PvP rewards, Darkmoon Fair number 3, ZG, Green Dragon, 16 debuff and Silithus content, then AQ tier 0.5, and then Nax Scourge Invasion. And I think actually that release makes more sense. My only concern again is the, progressive item release. And I was going to use the Argent Dawn as an example. There's some leggings that drop from, Dire Maul or Devil Sword leggings that can actually be beat out by just farming rep with Argent Dawn if you're a hunter. So, there's some of these items that if they don't do the progressive release, or here's another one, that the rank 14 weapons are, earlier on in the game, they have lots of stam on them, and later on the stats get changed and they're covered with strength and attack power and crit. So that completely changes the game.
I think the proposed schedule that you just read out there does make a lot of sense. And a few people, you're quite right, have been suggesting this, perhaps the magic number is 6 stages instead of what's been told to us. The only thing that I'll ask you guys as a group, because as you all know, you're the experts, I'm not, I'm presuming that the reason that there's still a call for a beginning with 8 debuffs and then progressing into 16 over time is that if you have the 1.12 talents and you have 16 debuff slots from the beginning, that could potentially somewhat trivialize some of the content early game. Is that the case?
It definitely is. And I actually made a note about this. And the thing is if any of you have played on private servers at all, or if you've watched any videos, it kind of is already trivialized to a degree. I mean, I was in a very casual guild with some really horrific players in a 40-man MC, and we got to rag at like the first night. It was pretty dumb. I was super surprised. Now, I agree that 16 debuff slots and, progressive itemization, if they don't put it in the game, it will make it worse. And so if that is the case, I really hope they actually accelerate the release of different content, which I think is actually a bad idea overall. So the real solution would be, in my opinion, to have progressive itemization in the game. I don't want DM at release. I don't think it's a good idea. And I will say this about the farm, like the tribute farm. I do believe that it's actually not a straight gold farm. That one is actually a largely in shard farm, isn't it? Because you get 5 to 6 blues, you DE, and then you can sell them on the auction house. Isn't that typically how that works?
It depends on what you're getting, because if you get weapons, you want to vendor them. But if you get
because they sell for 10 to 12 gold and stuff, whatnot. But but as far as lashers go, for anybody can farm. Most classes can farm. Even healer classes can farm lashers. That is a vendor farm. BRD is a vendor farm, but BRD is going to be in the game at release. The only class that can farm BRD effectively really is a mage, though. And the other thing I would say is, if you're a tenured player and you know this information, it's not hard to find out this information. Roll a mage first. Like, I think a lot of people are actually going to go that route. That's why I played a mage on the private server to start with. I fell in love with the class and the challenge it offered to me with AoE farming. So I stuck with it. I'm planning on doing that again. But I think people can make that decision for themselves. Like, it's up to them.
I was going to say, I think it's important that Blizzard actually acknowledged progressive itemization at least a little bit, in the sense that they held back PvP items because they know if they drop that right off the bat, people are just going to be farming rank 13, 14 before they even hit, the early raids. So they at least know that's a factor in early vanilla. So maybe if we just push it a little bit harder, they might push back some of these other things.
I think that
they know the problem's there at least.
I have hopes that they will have it. Like, we knew it was going to be patch 1.12 from the beginning. We didn't know about content release. That was a big question for, the community before BlizzCon. And then release their potential, packages, their 4 packages, showing there was going to be progressive content release, not in the right order that we like, not in the right packages, whatever, but they're going to do it. I think that they're going to do progressive itemization. PWJ made a good point because they did that with PvP gear, and I think they did that with PvP gear specifically because it wrecks the game for those who want to farm it out.
They said that they don't have a lot of the data prior to 1.12, and they have no plans of changing the 1.12 data. Both of those read extremely strongly to me that no progressive itemization. I don't see how you can read those two statements any other way.
That's true. I didn't think about that. God damn it, Fred.
But Fred, you're quite right. And tell me if my memory is failing me. Cause I remember you said that about 20 minutes ago in this call that there probably won't be progressive itemization. And now you've just clarified it's sort of an inference from what they've said. But remind me, they didn't explicitly say no progressive itemization, or they didn't address it directly, did they? That's
correct. Yes. So what Ian said was or actually prior to Ian, they had people talk about what items they had from the database or what data they had. And so, the item stats would be part of the database. And they said, look, we don't really know how much further we have before 1.12. It's like this whole mess. So it really has 1.12. And then Ian also said, the 1.12 data is sacrosanct and we're not going to change it, is what he said. So progressive items that would be changing the 1.12 data. And particularly using data that they don't.
I'd agree with you. That's I didn't think about that, but that's a really good point. And I think you're right. They did harp a lot that they're not changing that data. And if they don't have data from further back, then they can't change it.
But they can at least delay Dire Maul and shit, right?
Yeah.
Right,
I would like them to do that. I really would, because like I think Nostalgia said earlier, is there's an item or two for every single class that's biz in that instance that you would have to refarm after it was released. Like you have to farm your biz for MC and then you're in MC, and then you have to go back to Dire Maul after you're in MC to farm your biz to get the items. Like that's fun.
I was going to say, I think the incentivization really is important, is to get people to come back to these instances. I was just going to say, regarding the easiness and the trivialness of these early instances, look, most of it does have to do with 1.12 talents. Like again, Fury Warriors and Rogues are top in the charts, the meters. Fury Warriors couldn't even DPS in instances until 1.6, which is when Blackwing Lair was released. So having these Fury Warriors top in the chart when MC's out is already like super anti-Blitz like. And then Rogues got big buffs in 1.9 and 1.12. So obviously it's not going to be Blitz like, and the talents are going to do it. But as you said, like progressive itemization, that just makes the problem even worse.
Okay, so maybe they can't, quote, do progressive itemization. Although they're saying that they don't want to change the data, but then they're also going to release things in different order that is still changing the data. You know what I mean? So I think it's strange that, we've got 15 years worth of data that exists out there telling us that, hey, this is what the item stats were. But we can't change that, but we can change the release of the different things that, like, for instance, the Green Dragons drop nature resist gear. So why would that get released at the same time as AQ, right? That makes no sense. So, and then at the same time, then the Cenarian rep exists way before, shouldn't exist until then, but there's items from Cenarian rep that are extremely powerful, right? So, they're going to have to at least gate some of this content, even if they don't want to, quote, alter the 1.12 data. I don't know how they're going to do it.
It's tricky when you say that, because I think what's going on is the data they have is 1.12, right? 1.12, and that's the data, but they know the release schedule and how that affected the community. So that's not data. That's more just like understanding of how the game worked, and that's something they can modify, but they're not going to modify the code, right? I think that's
true.
That's the, I don't say the disconnect, but like the barrier there for what you were saying. But I am on board with, man, Fred, you broke my heart with that logic. I am not joking. I can't let it go. I was really excited, and I had my heart set on progressive itemization. I thought it was going to happen, but I can't, it makes sense now that you say that. It just makes sense. Fuck.
If I can.
Yeah, it kind of makes me mad.
Yeah, Fred's point has grabbed a lot of people, and it's funny because I'm streaming this conversation and people in chat as well were commenting that Fred is making way too much sense with that point. If I can just suggest for a second, I'll slightly go off on a tangent just to tie off something that and that was an amazing point made by all of you on that one, and quite frankly, I just want to comment that you listeners, when you call in for these group calls, you continue to blow me away with some of the points that you bring up and the manner in which you raise your arguments. It's something that I've been sitting here and just thoroughly enjoying when I get to sit back and just listen to all of you go back and forth. It's such a pleasure. But I'll just tie off the debuff point very quickly. I know it's a massive tangent from what we were talking about, but one other thing that they brought up when they were talking through the debuffs during the panel. Now, I was sitting there front row center. I was hanging on every word, and they really talked about it like for a second they were going to do 8, and then they convinced me they were going to do 16, and then they started talking about unlimited debuffs, and I was like, what the fuck are they going to do? Unlimited debuffs? This is crazy. Like, I really rode up and down on that one. If you go back and watch it and the way in which they worded it, it was really quite funny that maybe it was by design to sort of have us wondering what the hell was going on. But my question remained, in the hypothetical world where they did, for some reason or another, go with unlimited debuff slots, I was asked yesterday on the podcast that I mentioned I was on, about that potential unlimited debuff slot, if they had have gone with that like they talked about. Now, my answer was terrible, quite frankly. All I said was, at the end of the day, I think the flow-on effect from that would be, well, you might have a higher percentage of the player base than usual, perhaps rolling warlocks, because with their 1.12 talents and the great state the warlocks were in that version of the game, you'd get everyone wanting to be a warlock and just pumping mobs with dots and getting into raids left, right, and center. But then obviously you'd be fighting everyone for loot. But that was the only reason that I could come up with why unlimited debuffs were perhaps a bad idea. Can anyone add to that as to A, whether you thought for half a second they were actually going to do it, and B, in a hypothetical world where they did do it, what would be everything and anything wrong with that?
Shadow Priests, Serpent Sting.
Rogues, Warriors. But also I want to say, Josh, thanks for saying that you got lost and confused, because when Ian was talking, I was like, oh, fuck. Oh, good. Oh, wait, what? And then finally he said 16. I was like,
yeah.
Oh, okay. I get it. I played a rogue in retail, and when they increased the debuff limit, we could start using things like deadly poison and I'm forgetting the bleed that they have. What's the bleed ability? Come on, guys, I'm horrible.
Rupture.
Yeah, depending on the fight, those were the optimal DPS options. Instant poison wasn't always the best. If you're sitting on a boss for a long time, deadly worked out, and so did rupture, better than eviscerate. Especially depending on armor for the boss. So that was one class. Warriors could spec into different specs with Rend and the other bleeds that they have. There's a lot of classes. Everyone thinks Warlock, ... Warlock, ... There's so many classes that use dots and different debuffs.
Well, I think when Blizzard was faced with the choice between 8 and 16 debuffs, they had 8 debuffs where people weren't allowed to play the specs that they wanted to and were turned off from the game, and the content was still pretty trivial. Or 16 debuffs where people could play the specs that they wanted to, and the content is still trivial. So I imagine their mindset was, well, let's just give it 16 debuffs, and more people will play because they can play the specs they want to, they can play the classes they want to, and it doesn't really make a difference. So
there's also
I assume they came to that conclusion.
I was just going to say there's also the debuff priority change also. Right. So this idea, so somebody I can't remember who it was at one point mentioned something about, Sunder armor might get pushed off the table because like that kind of stuff won't happen. So you're going to have, you'll even be able to have hunters drop immolation trap on a boss. If you've got a unlimited debuff slot or 16 slot, opening, there are going to be options for things like that are sort of unconventional, which, yeah, that sounds cool. But then it also means that the DPS is going to go up, which means it turns a 2-minute boss fight into a 45-second boss fight, which then further trivializes the content. Sure, a 2-minute boss fight's not all that difficult, but 45 seconds is a face roll. It's not even fun at that point, right? So, I mean, I get that, it's quote trivialized because we've had 14 years or 10 years or whatever. And, we'll just have an extra Shadow Priest and more Warlocks. But yeah, I think having the 8 debuffs forces raids and forces players to think a little tighter about their rotation and, oh, wait, I can't use this ability. Let me try this other thing. So, and then when it gets changed to 16, now it forces them to start thinking in a different way. So I see it as a way to keep it more, I guess, interesting, right?
Yeah, I
don't
totally
know.
agree. I mean, like, by having 16 debuffs, they're gonna, or just more debuffs in general, they're gonna allow more people to play the class and specs they wanted to, and had to keep more people subscribed and playing games. So,
Yep. And just remember too, guys, 16 is double 8, but 16 still isn't that many. Like it's still a limited amount, and you still need to know debuff priorities. When I was in running in on one of the private servers, we actually had to test debuffs on mobs in the world because as a mage, we were having in a number of different classes, we were having priority debuffs fall off, and we didn't know what was pushing them off. So we had to go and test that because there was no data that we could find online that told us. And then eventually found a spreadsheet that had that, but whatever.
Whoa. 16 is double 8. I'm trying to keep up here. I'm new to this theory crafting thing. Poking fun, obviously. So now moving on from there, let's talk about, again, I just want to come back to the release schedule again. Was everyone happy with the fact that Battlegrounds won't be there from the get-go?
Yes.
Okay, seems a unanimous yes there. I'll tell you what, Fred, why don't we start with you? Talk to me about your excitement for World PvP and no Battlegrounds perhaps for those first few months.
Well, so long as you don't have an honor system in place, I don't think there's any problem with it. If you have an honor system in place, then you need that, like, incentivize people like camp, these lower levels, these all 52s, in order to grind that honor and get that high rank. But it seems like the honor system's coming out with the Battlegrounds, so that issue's not there. And I think this leads to like more emergent gameplay. People just playing and PvPing for fun as opposed to like for this reward. And I think that really is sort of a healthy way to get PvP going in the game. So I'm happy about it. Again, though, the thing I'm not happy about is that you have to wait all the way until BWL comes out in order to get it. I also agree with the 6 is the magic number. And so I would have, in the new 2 slot, I would have Battlegrounds and PvP there. Or sorry, the honor system there.
Mm.
I would prefer to have, like, I think is what you said. I'm not quite sure, Fred. I think it'd be better to have the honor system in play, but not the Battleground system. A little earlier, a little closer to launch. Because now that I'm thinking about it, I do want to experience South Shore, versus Tarmail. Like, I didn't get to do that when I played. I didn't do it. I just got like farmed like a noob, cause I didn't know what I was doing. And I would like to try that out, but I think the incentive will be lower for people to actually spend their time doing that when they could be out farming gold or farming biz if there's no honor to actually gain.
Yeah, I think just to be clear, I think it would be a really, really, really bad thing. It'd be a disaster to have the honor system out prior to Battlegrounds. Because what that does is you still have these hardcore people that want to grind honor, but all of a sudden they can't go to Battlegrounds to do it. And so what do? They go to level 52 zones, where they can, grind scouts, and they have to grind their high warlord by like going and like kind of griefing players for 16 hours a day. That is not good gameplay. You need to have Battlegrounds out, if you're going to have an honor system.
Yeah, places like Ungoro become a nightmare at that point. Because there's already going to be PvP going on in Ungoro over the Devil Sword, right? And it's a leveling zone. And then on top of that, you're going to essentially have groups of people out there farming people. That's a level of griefing that's going to get people to quit.
what's the time frame between when Battlegrounds come out and when they update the PvP items? Are they at the same like patch drop or?
No. It was like, I think 1.4 was PvP Battlegrounds, and then the updated PvP items was like 1.10, I think.
Yeah,
Okay.
big difference.
I mean, that's like almost a year's worth of content, So, and on top of that, the weapons, the rank 14 weapons, for instance, and the gear, under the 1.12 itemization would actually trivialize the gear in Blackwing Lair. So you would have people just farm High Warlord and get gear that outstrips Blackwing Lair before Blackwing Lair is even out.
That's what happened on a lot of the private servers, and I think it totally wrecked the game in a lot of degrees. Like, people would brag about these speed runs in MC in like 25 minutes, but they have, 10 or 12 rank 14s with rank 14 weapons on like 10 of the warriors, like doubling the next people down in damage. Of course they're going to do it in 25 minutes. It's ridiculous.
one thing I want to bring up from a point that you've just raised there is that the one thing we haven't heard about yet, and maybe we haven't heard about it because it's not coming, but completely unmentioned yet was any plans for tinkering with retuning dungeons and adjusting the difficulty of those dungeons. And PWJ, I know you're someone who's very anti, the feeling of burning down bosses in 25 to 30 seconds in Molten Core and whatnot. And some people have been calling for the retuning of these dungeons so that we again recreate that vanilla experience of actually maybe taking 5 minutes to down a boss. Now, Blizzard has seemingly been open to changes with what we've been told so far. Loot trading, sharding, maybe, there are certain things, certain concessions they're willing to make things better for the player base or what they deem to be better for the player base. Now, is anyone still slightly expecting retuning, or do you think the door has been closed on that?
I think the door's closed.
They said the door was closed, so they say the door's closed and the door's closed.
Well, sorry, you mean in terms of the data, back to FredMonroe's point that the data won't be changed?
Exactly.
Okay, I'm with you now. That makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so retuning, man, that's a big thing. If you retune it, then it's not the game that we've all been asking for over a decade, right? But also, if you retune it, it might make some of the content so difficult that then you end up with the same problem that we had, back in original vanilla when most people never got past Molten Core. Even getting tier 2 in Blackwing Lair was a big deal. So sure, there's going to be more people raiding Blackwing Lair, more people getting to AQ, but I have a feeling that, the first couple bosses in Blackwing Lair are still going to be sort of a gatekeeper for guilds. AQ is going to be a gatekeeper for sure. And Nax is still gonna, for the most part, still be sort of a hardcore thing. I don't necessarily have a problem with more guilds seeing the content if it turns out that, hey, over a decade's worth of theory crafting and data and practice is going to make us better. I don't have a problem with that. I have a problem with them intentionally in some way or another, or maybe unintentionally, making the game easier when it doesn't need to be, right? Dire Maul at release, for instance.
Yep.
16 debuff slots.
I'm picking up what you're putting down there, and I think thank you so much for pulling me up on that and reminding me about what FredMonroe highlighted earlier. And I think you're exactly right. When we take the words that they've highlighted to us that the 1.12 data is sacrosanct and it won't be touched and it's not theirs to touch, blah blah blah. I think you're right. That does create again a strong inference that retuning is probably out the window. You did say one thing though that I just want to pick up as a very quick talking point, even though let's dismiss retuning and say it's not happening. You mentioned the accessibility of Molten Core and you used the word it was a problem. And I just to go into bat for people who might feel somewhat differently about that. I don't have any particular strong thoughts one way or another, because as you all know, I wasn't a raider. But I think that some people might have jumped up at that and said well, maybe it's not a problem because it pushed people to really be committed to raiding. And if you wanted those tier 2 sets or whatever, then you had to devote the time and the effort. And if you then basically introduced 1.12 items, which made the game a little bit easier and opened that door to more people, thus obviously making it more accessible and having more eyes on the content that Blizzard has designed. Is it a problem, or is it something that should have been left behind the gates for the most dedicated?
I'll say this from my experience when I played retail is I started on a PvE server as a hunter. When I was leveling through Ashenvale, I was 10 levels higher than the shaman. I was like, I'm going to kill this dude. And I flagged. And then he actually kited me because I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I was so bad. And then I got to 60, joined this raid group. They already had MC and BW on farm. I got my Lock Delar real fast. And then I rerolled on a PvP server. And then I had to learn the game. And that is what made the game more fun for me is I was forced to learn how to play, because if I wanted to get back into, it was a new server. If I wanted to get back into endgame, I had to do it. And I was on a new class as well. And I ended up having to finagle my way into groups with these people that were in these, the number 1 and number 2 raiding guilds in the server, just so I could show off my skills in 5-mans and 10-mans to get an invite to the guild to make friends, to get like, oh, someone didn't show up, can you fill their spot, to help farm trash. And then slowly I made my way up and I became like the class lead. That's not going to happen as much anymore because people are just going to, I mean, you can pug MC. Like shortly after hitting 60, when you get even half of your biz, you can get a half biz pug and you can crush it. It's not that hard. It absolutely can.
I think, yeah, I mean, on private servers, you absolutely can. And we also have to think about the population on private servers versus what we're going to get in Classic, right? So I've been playing on private servers myself for about a year now. And because I saw the announcement and I was like, oh my God, I need WoW. And so I jumped back in onto a private server. And, you know, I had essentially spent almost 10 years away from the game, and I had to mostly relearn everything. And I relearned stuff, and remembered stuff that I had forgotten. And, you know, and I got up and we were doing Molten Core all in, you know, greens and blues and one-shotting bosses too. But, you know, we had a raid leader who had been raiding for several years on private servers. We had all of these people with experience who had rolled multiple characters. And I think when we get to Classic, it's going to be a little different. We're going to get a hodgepodge of people who have never played before. I've seen quite a few videos of people who are streaming current content and doing videos on current content who didn't get to experience vanilla. And they play the demo and they're really excited because it's a totally different kind of game. And so I have a feeling that we're going to see people coming into Classic who don't have experience. And it's going to be our job as people who know the content and who have played before and have all this fresh in our memory to, one, use some kid gloves and be kind, and to maybe be willing to be friendly while we group with these people who don't know what they're doing. And then also to understand that we're not going to be able to go in and face roll Molten Core for the most part because we're going to have a bunch of people who don't know what the hell they're doing. So, you know, you can't tell people, you know, to group up on a Surger because they're not going to know what the hell you're talking about, right?
Right. Sorry, Nostalgia, can I just jump in here regarding that point and sort of your previous point? Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
So, you know, you're bringing up the knowledge mechanics, and in your earlier point, you said, look, we can't have retuning because that's not the game we asked for, you know, and I don't really mind if people do much better because of all this increased knowledge. You know, I really just sort of disagree with that point pretty strongly. So again, one of the major reasons why the content's going to be so much easier is because 1.12, the classes are just so much stronger, with the exception of like Hunter and Enhancement Shaman, who no one really cares about their damage. It's so much stronger in 1.12 than 1.1. And also with the, you know, the new items and the raised debuff limit, we're going to see just like the same players playing the same content are going to have so much of an easier time playing MC. You know, even Nostalgius did retuning of their raids. Like, you know, Nano said this specifically. They would, you know, look at how the raids between 1.1 and 1.12, they actually speculated because of some of the research they did that the numbers on the bosses, like their health, their HP, their armor, was actually nerfed come 1.12 so that people could be like shepherded through the content and get through the content earlier than they could earlier. Like, and so they used the harder, you know, versions of the bosses, which was retuning from 1.12. You know, like, and then they also said specifically that they used old Nixie mechanics that made Nixie much more challenging. Like, we're not going to have any of that in 1.12. And that was all retuning that Nostalgius did thinking it was Blizz-like. So I think, like, really, I just so disagree with your point that, you know, it's not the game. If we don't have retuning, it's not going to be the game we'll remember. I think the opposite. If we need retuning for it to be the same game we remember, simply because just mechanically wise, not even related to player skill, you know, people are just so much stronger in 1.12 than they are in like 1.1 through 1.9, for example.
Fred, that was really well put, and I actually am completely on board with you. I was one of the only changes I wanted to have was retuning of bosses because I played retail, and I've played on private servers. Private servers are just, they're so easy, and I have a feeling that Classic's going to be the same, and I hope I don't lose interest in the first few months when they don't have new content coming out because like a lot of players and other games that I play, when you reach the top and you're the best of the best, you kind of get bored.
I mean, just keep in mind that these private servers like the Nostalgia, they have already done retuning based on the content. So You're saying that that's too easy. And they have specifically said, we made the bosses harder than they are in 1.12. Well, so it's going to be even easier on private servers. In vanilla. Just based on, I mean, I take NostalgiaDad's point that, you know, people might not be as good as they are on private servers, but just from a pure in-game mechanic perspective, it's going to be even easier to do it in vanilla than it will be to do it on Astarias, for example.
Yeah, and as far as learning mechanics, it's as easy as Googling in YouTube on this boss or this raid, and you can find 100 videos on the mechanics of every boss in every instance and how to do it. There are add-ons that assist you. It's not difficult to learn boss mechanics from vanilla.
True. I always say this one
disagree.
thing. Sorry, one point quickly, then I'll get to you, PWJ. I was just going to say, I always feel though, however, as much as you might laugh at this, there's a difference between reading and watching and then doing it. Like some people can't make the connection. But anyway, PWJ, you go for it.
Yeah, I actually kind of disagree. I think people, when Classic comes out, are going to find the content a lot more difficult than they thought. For instance, after we first talked, Josh, I was telling you about how our guild had clearly, we cleared Molten Core super quick.
Yep.
And shortly after that, our guild ended up going Alliance. So for the week, we had to find someone else to raid Molten Core with. So we joined like a mediocre private server guild. Said, hey, yeah, we'll raid with you as my younger brother and I. And figured, we're going to blow through this, just like our other guild. And we were wiping nonstop on like Major Dormo or some shit like that. And I was thinking to myself, like, these guys are private server players. How is this happening? So I think if it can happen to them, I think retail players, when they come in, are going to get stalled up on that content too, thinking it's a cakewalk.
Yeah.
And I think even without retuning, people are still going to have trouble with the content.
I agree.
And I think it's better for the veteran players. You guys are going to be the most decked out people on the server. And people are going to be like, wow, you cleared Ragnaros? How'd you do that?
Yeah. And I think if I can just ask you, FredMonroe, I mean, hearing what PWJ just said and sort of taking on your points from earlier, obviously everyone involved in this call, with the exception of me, it's quite clear. And, I've dealt with you guys before, like you're exceptionally talented players, in that upper echelon of raiders who are, very, very knowledgeable about the game. So Fred, you'd obviously be quite aware that you're in the sort of slim minority of people who are fucking fantastic at this game.
Well, I make no comments about whether there should be rebalancing based upon like the changes in skill and the changes in knowledge. I don't mean to imply that at all. I really have no idea how it's going to turn out. I'm just talking from a pure mechanic standpoint. Just in-game data, not taking into account any players, not taking into account better computers, better internet. Characters are much stronger in 1.12. Their debuff limit makes it somewhat of a difference, though not as big as the talent and mechanic changes. Bosses are actually weak into 1.12. They have lower health and armor, at least according to what Nostalgia's figured out. And also there's certain mechanics like Anixia's conflagrate mechanic, which Nano said they used the old one from 1.3, not the one from any patch after that. And then we also, we also have what seems like no progressive optimization. Mm-hmm. So characters can have better access to better items. Just totally forget about player skill, better computers, better internet, anything like that. The content is going to be much, much easier in a no retuned 1.12 than it will have actually been back then in vanilla WoW. Yep. So if you actually want something that's Blizz-like and like vanilla WoW, just on a pure mechanic basis, I think you need retuning of the raids. Yep. And Nostalgia thought that as well. They built themselves as a Blizz-like server, and yet they made these changes.
I'll say this real quick, Fred, after a couple of Nano's interviews, is they did make it harder, so they thought, but at the same time, he was very adamant in saying that they didn't know what their stats were anyways. Like, they didn't have any data to really tell them what the armor or the health was of all the bosses. They're very open about that. So even though they made it harder, it may have not been as hard as it was because they had no way of checking. And there's no checks and balances for them. They didn't have any way to find information.
Yeah, Deep Breath is a great example of that. Nobody knows how Deep Breath works. Nobody. And when Nano was at Blizzard, he asked them and they said, basically nothing. They just laughed, right? So none of us know how Deep Breath works. That's one good example. And then the armor values, the health values, we just found out recently that some of the damage values in private servers were wrong for some of the bosses in Molten Core, right? So we're still learning. I guess I'm open to the change. I'm open to it maybe, but that also means we have to open ourselves up to progressive itemization, right?
I love that.
So
I absolutely love that.
Guys, if I can just redirect that, there are some great points on all that, and I'm sorry to sort of take us all down that hypothetical road. And as I say, Fred really raised the best point overall at the start of the podcast, at the start of the call, when he said, look, this is basically the inference is that this has been ruled out. So I love talking retuning dungeons, and that was a lot of fun, but I do tend to agree with him that we can infer from the words used that it's more than likely not coming our way.
Oh, yeah, there's no way it's coming.
Yeah. If I can just take us off on one last topic, because I've already sort of held you all up as longer than I promised I would. And the big one is loot trading that we haven't touched on yet. So NostalgiaDad, I'll turn to you to kick us off on this one. What were your thoughts on what I thought was arguably the biggest curveball of the classic panel that nobody saw coming in loot trading?
Okay, so I didn't expect this at all. I had no idea this was coming at all. This is completely out of left field for me.
Yep.
And I didn't really have any experience with loot trading when I played. I played vanilla. I got to raid top content in TBC, and then I quit early Lich King. So I went back and I read all about it. I watched videos. I did some research to find out what they're talking about. And I understand that there's sort of like two different versions of loot trading. My feelings are on this. When it first got announced, I thought, oh, interesting. That's cool. That might help things, with GM tickets or whatever. But then I sat there and I thought about it. It's like, oh man, this could totally be abused, like really hard. And then, I went and I've been talking in the Discord. I'm sort of vocal here sometimes. And so I had some back and forths, about loot trading and how I think it could be abused. And I haven't had my mind changed on that. I see it. I would much rather us go back to the days of having to wait 4 days to get loot given to us by a GM because of a misclick than have loot trading and have people giving gear to people and stacking rolls in groups. And yeah, I feel like it would completely change the social dynamic. For me, it's all about the social aspect of the game. Yeah, we're talking content and all this stuff this whole time, but I've got a friend of mine that I made back in early Burning Crusade, and I still talk to him. He was at my house not but a month ago. I was at his wedding. We make friends in some cases, like for life. And this changes the way that we socially interact with other people. And that for me is the big thing here.
Let me just throw in one point of my own before I get the opinions from the rest of you on this one and just sort of have a think while I'm going on this rant. Now, you just mentioned, NostalgiaDad, that you haven't heard anything yet that has changed your mind and that you're still quite anti-loot trading. Now, I want to preface this with, I am too. I'm still anti it. Now, I understand why Blizzard has done it, which is what a lot of people are saying. We get it. We know why you're doing it. You want to, basically lighten the burden on yourselves in terms of GM tickets and whatnot, and I accidentally rolled on this, blah, blah, blah. Fine, we get it. We also understand your reasoning that, hey guys, you don't understand, this will actually help with ninja looting. It's all great. Here's my issue is I just, outside of that, I just don't think if that's the only reason you're doing it, then fine, it's necessary. But let's sort of, again, hypothetically remove that. It's completely unnecessary in my mind. Now, here's the problem with it. As he said, it can be abused, blah, blah, blah. But I took another call yesterday, as I mentioned, another call with MooseTheDog, and we had a chat, and MooseTheDog put forward a few points that actually did start to somewhat alleviate my concerns. Now, I'm still concerned about it, but he made me feel a little bit better about it. Now, he mentioned the following 2 points. He said, firstly, it requires such a relatively detailed level of collusion in terms of the amount of pre-planning that has to go into it between people to be like, if you're okay, you and I will roll on this one, and yeah, let's do that, and let's say this, and blah, blah, blah. And then also if you throw into little tricks like maybe they'll unequip certain items to show that they don't have it, and all the nefarious little tools that you might use to trick people. And I did somewhat by what he was saying in that it's not just on a whim. You might just be like, hey, let's all roll on this item and beat this person. There is somewhat of a level of planning that would take place that might decrease the chances that you'd run into that kind of somewhat convoluted collusion. And then on top of that, he mentioned, how about a scenario that Blizzard could actually consider where you create an element of, openness about this and sort of transparency, where if someone were to trade an item from, this loot trading concept with a BOP item, then basically everyone in the party gets notified of it, whether it's by way of an in-game mail an hour later that says, hey, by the way, this item was traded from X person to Y person in the raid that you were in, just in case you didn't know. That might then decrease the chances that people decide to abuse the system because they know that everyone's going to hear about it. I thought that was an interesting concept as well. I think he also raised the alternative, too, that how about, if you had a system where something like you could only trade it to, the person who had the second highest roll on the item and only make it between those two and rule out everyone else. Look, it's something that I think there are alternatives out there, and it actually did make me feel a little bit better about it. And I'll play that call after this one, and you'll hear all the great points on it. But just that rant that I've now gone on and borrowing some of its ideas, do any of you feel that might help, or do you think loot trading is horrible and it can't be fixed?
I hadn't thought of those ideas, and I like them. I do think that the collusion involved to make it make sense if you don't want to be called out within the community. Like if you have a warrior rolling on a caster's plus 1% to spell hit, why would you do that? Oh, I'm going to give it to my friend, or I don't know, it was a misclick. That's going to be called out in the community. And I have a couple notes on this too. Like I think there's a couple things that I think this is getting blown out of proportion. I absolutely do. And I think that, like I said, if you're running in a pug, you're going to see a lot of people running with Master Looter if they don't know the other people in the pug. If you're in a pug that isn't running Master Looter and you don't know anybody else in that pug, there's a high chance that they're all friends. I think that's going to be a commonly accepted thing that's going to happen within the game if you want to protect yourself. Secondly, this is stuff that's going to happen in pugs, not in guild runs, not in friend runs, and it's going to be for farming for biz. Once biz is done and if you're a raider and you go into raids, it's not going to affect you as much because you're not going to run those instances any longer. And on top of that, the biggest thing is the community shunning that'll happen from it. I think it's huge. I think that'll be a big turnoff. I almost want to say like the ninjing and the ninja looting is no longer to be as much of an issue. Unless there's someone from, master looting themselves or their friends, but maybe something like loot whoring will come up, right? And these are the loot whores. These are the loot mobs or whatever you want to call them. They work together. Don't fucking group with those guys.
The loot mafia.
Exactly. And I think what a lot of people are missing is, and maybe it's because no one experienced this, but I experienced this on multiple occasions in my raiding groups, back in BC as well as in vanilla, where it was a misclick loot. I didn't even know that GMs could return gear. I thought it was done. And we had a lot. I can't tell you so much guild drama that came out from that, because my guild, both guilds, they used master loot, loot council, right? So people were like, that wasn't a misclick. You totally gave that to them because that's your fucking friend. What the hell, man? That's bullshit. And we had a couple times where we couldn't raid for over a week because we had to replace half of our roster. Like that happened. That's more of an issue than people really realize.
Yeah, I remember those kinds of things too. At least in my guild, I didn't have that too often, but it happened once or twice. This is why I think the idea of loot trading would be fine for any time you're in a raid, right?
Yep.
So if you're in a raid, then loot trading would exist. And if you're in a 10 or a 5-man, then it wouldn't, right? So, because I don't really consider Ubers as a raid, although technically you have to form a raid group to do Ubers, right? Mm-hmm. So I think if you want to limit to loot trading to anything like 20-man and above, I'm on board with that. I think that's fine. That saves time. That saves hassle. That saves drama. I'm cool with that. My issue is, so here, let's do a scenario. You've got an Ubers run, right? Everybody, all of the melee DPS, the hunters, the rogues, the warriors, they all want True Strike, right? So on private servers, what you'll see is, LF 3M, 2 DPS, 1 healer, True Strike on reserve, right? So now you have the option, when you're going to join that group, okay, I'm not going to get to roll on that item because that item's already reserved. But with the loot trading, you wouldn't have to do that. What they could do is, let's say they just invite people and they just leave it open and they say, is there any items reserved? Nope. Well, now they get their group faster, so they don't care. Half the group is guildies, half of them are other people. And so you've got the one guy from the one guild who is a rogue that wants True Strike. And you've got another DPS warrior in the group from that guild also, who doesn't need True Strike shoulders. He's already got them, but maybe he carries around his tanking gear with him. So he throws his tanking shoulders on and says, I still need my True Strike too. And then he rolls on those. It doesn't, I feel like the idea of it having to be a big collusion or something isn't, necessarily the case.
Okay.
So, it feels like the idea that, it takes all this extra effort for collusion. I don't know if I really buy that,
No, that's fair enough.
Seems like
I totally agree.
Go for it, PWJ.
I totally agree. I could totally see any guild that's trying to deck out their players are gonna abuse that without a doubt. And I heard Nixium drop a video the other day where he said that this loot trading isn't par for the course for vanilla because ninjas were a part of vanilla, but that's not it at all. That's not the reason we're afraid of it. It's because I can tell you right now, guilds are going to abuse this exactly like that. My example is going to be the shield off the last boss in Ubers. You're going to run your main tank from your guild. He equips a green shield and says, I really need that shield off the last boss in Ubers. And he's going to roll on it along with the second warrior in the group. That's actually the off tank for the guild that really needs the shield. And now they have double the chance of winning it. And he's just going to pass it to his off tank. And so anyone that's confused about how this is going to be abused, that's exactly how it's going to go down.
Okay, so
I would combat that, PWJ, and say that from my experience, when I've done biz runs with guilds, and we can't fill a full 10 man for Ubers, we have to pick up a couple pugs. First, we ask our friends this: if we can't get anybody, it's a full on pug. On that last boss, Drac, that's master looted. Sorry, we'll allow you to roll for it, but if you come into a group and you don't realize that's going to be the case, I'm sorry, that you need to pay attention, and that might sound harsh of me, but I don't know. That's my opinion, and honestly, maybe I played a different game than a lot of people, but I didn't do many pugs. I refused to do them for a number of reasons. I mean, you could do 2 guild runs in the time you could do a single pug if you even finish the instance with 1 pug. That's a waste of fucking time.
Yeah,
I never did that shit. So, and I'm sure you all would agree that when you are farming your biz, you do your best to find either a farm group of consistent players you can pull on from your friends list, or you lean heavily upon your guild, right?
It depends. Like, if you play during weird times, or, if maybe a bunch of your group is out of town, or like I tend to play after a certain time of night when the server pop is lower. And so, our guild, actually going back through vanilla, I've always had a harder time finding groups. So I've always had to pug stuff, always, except for raids when I had to really try to find a raid. And so I'm kind of sympathetic to the idea that these groups are going to pug and then just not tell you the truth. Yeah, sure, boss will be on master loot, but you could avoid the drama of that in the first place, and the drama of not finding people to fill your group if you just put it on rolls and then just cheat the roll system, right? Then you don't even have to worry about it, and then there's no social repercussions because nobody's going to know.
Exactly, that's the thing. And I think we're kind of a special case in that we know we'll have groups that we can fill with guildies and friends and whoever that can swap items, but there's going to be a ton of players that are playing a group of 2, 3, 4 players together that are just friends that are just going to abuse the system to pass loot amongst each other for whatever poor sap decides to join their party. It doesn't particularly apply to us, but for, probably a vast majority of the community,
I'm not sure you guys are aware of the bug. I don't know if I didn't experience this in retail because I just didn't play this way, but on private servers right now, a lot of them at least, there's something just as bad, if not worse. You can, if you can leave it on rolls, you can go to a boss, like for instance, I think it's Drathome. There's a wand that drops, and there's a couple of really good items that dropped from the last boss, but it takes forever to get there. You can just kick someone from the party when the rolls are out, And even if they rolled need, they can't get the item.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if you're kicking someone from your party, that person's going to go to Storm and go, yo, what the fuck? This person kicked me, blah, blah, ninja.
Screenshotting
But
of the forums.
Yeah, but if they look at the rolls and they go, I lost a fucking roll, they're just going to think it was just down to chance. Whereas behind the scenes, they just swapped items and they got what they wanted, you know? It's not as sus.
I get your point, but I honestly don't think it's going to be used as much as people think it is. And I really think that the problems that it resolves are far more substantial than the problems that it causes. Because there's ways around the problems that it causes to a degree. And maybe that's just my jaded perspective because I play a different game than other people do, than a lot of people do, it seems.
That's a fair point.
The drama that happens when you have, I've literally had guilds split in half, and then that caused a massive rivalry for the rest of the length of that server. Like, so bad that people quit the game because they couldn't log in without getting berated with whispers.
Can I butt in at this point? Now that's a story that piques my interest. Can you tell that story with a bit more detail?
Yeah. So back in retail, my guild that I was in, this happened before I joined the guild. I didn't know what actually happened. And I found out it happened afterwards because I didn't know why there was this other alliance guild that just fucking hated us. Like, absolutely just hated us. And they would do anything they could possibly do, including like asking their horde friends to like log into level 10 ult in the horde and ask them to come and like block our raids as we went to MC and BWL. It was this massive disparity, like just this hate that grew between these two groups. And it happened from a loot council agreement. From my understanding, there was a misloot that resulted in more drama coming out and eventually a split of the guild, almost maybe not perfectly in half, but the raid leader left and he took with him a majority of the core raiders because he was the raid leader and no one wanted to be left behind with the secondary raid leader. It was bad. It took us a long time to recover from that.
If I can ask, sorry, was that in vanilla or on a private server?
I think you're confusing this. Is that master loot? Are you talking about he master looted something to someone else?
Yeah, and he said it was a misclick.
Okay, because I mean, the situation that can rise with the trading item is he can send it to one person.
Yes.
I don't know how to explain it.
The problem was if that happened, if we had loot trading back then, it would have been like, oh fuck, misclick, trade it to player X. Cool, that's done. Problem resolved. Nothing happens after that point. I didn't know, and a lot of people didn't know, you could submit a GM ticket, wait 4 or 5 days, and the item would be refunded or transferred from player to player. We didn't know that. That wasn't an option for us.
Vel, if I can
think
ask,
that's why raid might
go for it.
I was just going to say, I think that's why it might be good for raids, right? Because then it's good for the social construct of the raid. But for people you don't know, you should err on the side of caution, right? I mean, I just assume that I always go into every pug assuming somebody's going to do something stupid or something malicious.
That's smart. You're a smart man.
Oh, how funny.
So,
you're the kind of guy that goes into the restaurant and sits with his back against the wall so you can always see what's coming.
That's where I sit,
yeah. Yeah.
Vel, if I can just ask quickly, if you're okay with saying, do you remember what the guild name and the server name was for that one?
Yeah, Gareth's server Overkill.
Okay.
That was the guild that I was a part of.
There you go. Now look, everyone, just to tie off on this one, we've heard from everyone. Fred, I might finish up with you on loot trading, and obviously if anyone else has anything to add, go for it. But, one thing that's coming up in chat on Twitch right now is, and this is something that I've been wondering as well. I've got watcher, Fetters Puncher, who's saying that, it's not going to happen as often as you think in game. And I've been one of the people saying that as well, going, look, maybe at the end of the day, we're getting all up in a huff about nothing because look, realistically, how many times individually are you expecting to see this or be a victim of an abuse of loot trading? Once, twice, 3 times in your classic lifetime. But I said the problem is, and same with the ninja looting, when it happens, it's going to sting hard. But yeah, okay, you're not going to be seeing it once a day. It's not going to be super common. Or do you feel that actually it might be a bit more common than people think?
I just have so many questions before I, give any sort of opinion on it about how this is going to be used. Is it going to be available in dungeon? Is it going to be restricted to just raid group? Is it going to be restricted to just master loot or will roles work as well? Those are all questions. It's a very boring take, but those are all questions I'd want to have answered before I really, weighed in on how exactly it's going to affect things. I will say in terms of just the misclick loots, I did so much raiding on Nostalgia and Elysium, and it was only one time that we ever had a misclick misloot, and that was Mage Tier 2 pants from Ragnaros were mislooted to like a rogue or something. So it was a clear misclick because it was Mage pants to a rogue. But that was the only time we ever had any issue like that. So, it seems like sort of a non-issue to me, but my experience might just be unique and other people maybe had a lot more misclicks. But again, I would want to know like how Blizzard plans to implement this. Is it only going to be master loot and only for like raid groups of 20 size or more, or how's it going to work? That's what I want to know first.
Fair enough. What about the rest of you? Do any of you, you've already chimed in a little bit on some people have said it's going to happen a bit. Some people have said it's not going to happen at all. Just to succinctly tie it off, if I can just go through, NostalgiaDad, PWJ, Vel, just short and sharp. Do you think it's going to happen a lot or a little?
What's going to happen a lot?
Oh, sorry, loot trading being abused.
Yeah, I think if there's a split between raids and 5-mans, it would make it much better. Because I can guarantee it's going to get abused in 5-mans without a doubt. So if there is some kind of split between that, it might help ease the tension. But if it's how it is in retail, where it applies to everything, there's definitely going to be abuse in 5-mans for sure.
Yeah, I think abuse in 5-mans and Ubers, Ubers all the way down to RFC. Yeah, I can see abuse happening on almost regular basis. Yeah, that's right. RFC. Yeah, I see it happening quite a bit in those cases. I don't see it being accused or misused in raid hardly at all. Just because you're taking the time to really raid with these people. If somebody actually does it in a way that doesn't make sense, you now have the social sort of implications of ninjing from your guild or giving loot to people and then creating the kind of drama that Vel was talking about, right? So. But with a loot trading, those shouldn't exist. And if something like that still happened, well, now you have a reason to really get upset. But in 5-mans, 10-mans, yeah, it could happen. And I'd say all the time.
All right, everyone. Look, I just want to say thank you so much for being a part of this call. Each and every single one of you. FredMonroe, it's always a pleasure to have you on. You quickly turning into a favorite. Sorry?
I just said thank you so much for having me.
No, my pleasure. Look, you're quickly turning into one of my favorite guests. You're so insightful and you raised some great points today. NostalgiaDad, it's always a pleasure to hear from you. And can I just say, your mic is fucking on point. It's crystal clear and I love it. Thank you so much for being a part of the call today.
Yeah, sure, man. Anytime.
And PWJ, mate, it's always a pleasure to hear from you. I know you're tired as you're probably ready to go to sleep, and I fucked you over because I told you this was going to be a half an hour call, and in typical Countdown to Classic fashion, here we are at the hour 40 mark. So I'm so sorry about that.
It's all good. My pleasure. I actually spent my night shift driving and listening to your last couple podcasts, so my pleasure.
I appreciate it, mate. And Vel, it was your first time. I hope you had fun. Thank you so much for diving into the Countdown to Classic waters.
Yeah, like I said, thanks for having me. It was definitely entertaining. Good to talk with everybody. I talked with NostalgiaDad a bit on the Discord. I'm glad to find.
Yeah, we've had some good back and forth.
It's been great. I really enjoyed the Discord. It's become my most popular Discord server to be a part of. And I'm on board with you, PWJ. It is 6:30 in the morning where I'm at, and I have not slept. So. Good luck for me today.
Oh my God. Thank you so much. You guys are absolutely pushing your bodies for Countdown to Classic, and I can't thank you enough. So with that, I'll leave you all at this point. I'll let you go and I'll move to some other calls. Thanks guys. I'll talk to you later.
Cheers.
Thanks, Josh.
Bye.
Thanks, Josh.
Okay, we've got more Countdown to Classic listeners on the line, and it's another group chat that so many of you have enjoyed that the show has been doing lately. So I've gotten 3 Countdown to Classic listeners in here, 3 people who are very involved in the Countdown to Classic Discord, and I'll introduce them one by one. A lot of you by now are quite familiar with Ayle. Ayle, say hey.
Heyo.
And Sommerlin, we haven't heard from you for quite a few episodes. Welcome back.
Hi, thank you. Hi, everyone.
And TianSG, who I actually took a call from a few days ago while I was still in LA, but due to microphone issues, we had to scrap it. It was tragic, but welcome back, TianSG.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, just thank God that we scrapped it. None of you wanted to hear that.
All right. Well, look, thanks so much to all of you for coming on. And it's so great to have you all here in the one call when I obviously, liaise with all of you through the Discord so often. And the reason that you're all here is the demo is coming to a close in about, 24 to 36 hours time. And it was, of course, extended, and we've had plenty of time now to really consume this thing and wrap our heads around it. So I really wanted to break it down in terms of impressions, pros, cons, hopes, dreams, everything you've got to say about it. So I figured I'd just start with you, Ayle, and we'll piggyback off of any points that you bring up. But at the end of the day, for you, you said that, well, just off mic, off this recording, you were saying that you've played it a fair bit and you've leveled a bunch of characters. So tell us firstly what you've done in the demo and then what you think of it.
Okay. I pretty much hopped in as soon as I could. Last Friday, I believe it opened up, and started playing it right away. I kind of hopped around on a few characters. First character I leveled up was a mage, and then a shaman. And so I played every character at least to 16, and kind of my initial impressions, wasn't actually that good.
Mm-hmm. Why so?
Mainly just because from playing it before we had got any information from the panels, I was pretty worried because I felt like while the artwork and, the lighting and, the music and everything like that was really spot on, that the gameplay felt very, very different.
And what were the biggest differences that jumped out to you immediately?
Some of the big things were, like, for example, the hit points and mana points regen, felt really off. The combat ranges for melee and, moving targets and things, felt very different as well. Of course, at that time, there's also, a lot of, the interfaces and stuff were available. You can hit LFR and get that screen to pop up, and, the color blindness, which is great to have in there, but there was just a lot of noticeable differences I found.
Okay.
As well as sharding, of course, right?
Yeah, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that for sure. But, TianSG, if I can move over to you. So we've just heard Ayle say that he wasn't overly impressed with some of the gameplay from the demo, but we've also heard Blizzard comment during BlizzCon sort of, I wouldn't say pleading with us, but just sort of throwing out the caveat that, hey, this is very much so a work in progress. We know there are mistakes in there. You tell us what they are. We'll work on fixing them. Now, did you view this as just a state of the game from Blizzard and just something that we could have a bit of fun with? Or were you actually somewhat troubled like Ayle by what you saw in there?
I mean, it's funny because all the things that Ayle points out, I noticed and I agree with in terms of the mana and HP regen being off and all of that. But I had a positive view of it. It just felt right to me. Now, I didn't play as many characters. I only had the one really, a warlock, because my main back in vanilla was a warlock, so I figured play something that I might vaguely remember. But it was generally positive, and I will definitely say it felt a lot more like an alpha than a demo. Demos are normally a little bit cleaner, for sure. And there were a lot of bugs, like the Warlock pet had a lot of issues, but overall I felt good. And it was especially one where I think for me, the mix of playing the demo and then listening to the panel, and especially Ian Hazakostas talk about it, and everybody sounded really passionate and really engaged, and I really felt like they were coming from a good place. All of that gave me a positive outlook.
All right. Now, Sommerlin, I'll turn to you real quick. And you mentioned before we started recording that whilst you had been playing the demo, you actually stopped playing a couple of days ago. You haven't really jumped in over the last 48 to 72 hours. Now, is that because you weren't enjoying it as much as you thought you might, or just no particular reason you'd be playing it if you could?
Well, part of it is that I had to go back to work, but, also, I just kind of felt like, the Westfall stuff, that was really short. I finished that in just like a few hours. So then after that, I went to the Barrens, and I started realizing that I was really, investing a significant amount of time in this. And I'm just thinking, this comes out in the summer. I don't want to burn myself out on this. So I think I'll just let it rest. I was actually really shocked though by how much more Horde content there was versus the Alliance content. And the other thing that I was really struck by, I think maybe just because I have had so much experience on private servers, coming into the demo, I felt like it felt really easy. And I'm not sure if that's because things weren't tuned correctly, or maybe if because there are so many pathing issues on private servers. I don't know if maybe I'm used to bad pathing. So when I'm playing the real thing, the good pathing feels strange and it feels easy. But yeah, I thought that it was interesting. I'm really glad that I played it.
Well, sorry, go for it, Ayle.
Can I hop in? Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you there, and I think a lot of that could be due to like the health and mana regen. But the one huge thing that I didn't mention is that the controls and the ping is so low. It just felt so nice.
Oh, for sure. It was a welcome change. If you do happen to be a private server player, that was one of the comments that was shining through from people, was that, oh my God, low ping again. Hello, old friend, how I've missed you. So definitely, it's funny. I came back to Australia to play, and I immediately was met with 180 plus ping, which, not a huge deal, but I was like, oh yeah, good old Australia. But, it was one of those things, Sommerlin, that you brought up when you talk about the difference in content between the Horde and the Alliance. That was the main reason why a lot of I really got caught up in Bo Bell's point that, they couldn't possibly be giving us the Barrens and Westfall. It's so skewed in the Horde's direction. They have so much more content to do and see in the Barrens versus what's in Westfall. And that's why I thought we were going to get Elwyn and Durotar, but they went with what they did, and I ended up rolling. I told you all that I'm going to play Alliance because I'm going to give them their last go around with me before I go Horde for Classic. And then I just like you, Sommerlin, I tore through Westfall really quickly, and I was like, fuck this, I'm going Horde. There's so much more to do, and it takes so much longer to run around. So I'm still mucking around with the Horde. So, but in saying that, one last point from you, Sommerlin, overall, did you enjoy it? Are you happy with it?
Oh yeah, I had a great time. I had a blast. I thought it was a lot of fun. I did think it was interesting though that it did feel different from how I was expecting it to feel.
Okay, now when you talk about the difference in feeling, Ayle, I'll turn back to you. We compare sort of the feel of a private server. We compare the feel of what vanilla was way, way, way back in the day, and then we look to the feel of this demo that we got. Do you feel that each has its own unique flavor and is quite obviously different in terms of gameplay, or do you feel like we're splitting hairs at this point?
I think right now they are fairly different. I just want to mention earlier that my initial impressions were more worried and negative, but after I played it more and listening to the talks over the weekend, I did have a much more positive feel about it. At this point, I think they have so much work left to do. It's really going to be a wait and see. I think it's kind of gone to the point, the more I've played it, that it's kind of like you had mentioned earlier. I kind of just want to play it now, almost at any cost now that I've gotten in there. Considering the fact that they've only talked about implementing, kind of the base functionality, that they haven't really touched combat yet, or PvP combat, and that's all things that they're going to be looking for feedback from. So I think at this point they are different, but it has the same feeling, at least to me, like outside of the game, the community of people getting together to do quests, grouping up, that sort of thing, the stuff that really drives the players together to play with each other, which is, for me, the thing that I love about Classic the most.
Okay. Now, TianSG, I just want to finish up on this point of the demo before Ayle obviously raised what came up in the panel and taking on board what was told to us on that second day of BlizzCon, alleviating a lot of people's concerns about what they might have been seeing in the demo. But just to wrap up what you actually got to play, TianSG, hearing what we heard at the panel and everything and combining that with the gameplay, I put this to the Discord today, and I'd love to hear your take, and then if anyone else has a take on it as well. Now that we've played it, we've had our fun with it, do you feel that the demo was necessary? Personally, I can tell you that now that we've done it all and seeing the state it was in, I just think it's something that Blizzard didn't have to do. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to shit on Blizzard giving this to us. It was a great little fun surprise and very, very, a pleasant gift for them essentially to give the player base, even though we had to pay for it, blah, blah, blah. Like I see the funny side of that, but had they not done it, I don't think anyone would have been complaining if we didn't have a playable version of the game before the end of the year. I think if they had just done BlizzCon and said, hey guys, release summer 2019, and even if they wanted to go a step further and say, oh, and by the way, beta in February, I think that would have placated the classic fan base enough. And I don't think the demo was actually required. Now we got this demo and a lot of people are like worried going, oh God, this is not in a fantastic state. This is where you're at with it. You've got a long way to go. So do you think it was a necessary move by Blizzard to sort of whet the appetite of the fan base?
I'd say from a pure business standpoint, you'd probably say absolutely not. Just because, I know for me personally, it doesn't matter. Like, it's never really mattered. I'm going to play the game when they release it. So I think a lot of people are like that. In terms of them, a lot of people were saying, oh, they only added that to try to get more people to buy virtual tickets. I'm sure there might have been a few people who did that, but by and large, I'm sure that's negligible. From a business standpoint, I'm sure that they certainly didn't lose anybody from this. I very highly doubt they would have gained a lot of people from this, although who knows. But from a communicating with the fan base standpoint, so you mentioned like the idea of they come out with a release date, they have the same Q&A panel, they say all the same things, and then they say, beta in February, here we go. I think the interesting thing about this is it's so far from the release date, and it's given us a chance to actually get in there. Like the sharding thing, that's probably something that never would have come up in the panel had they not had the demo. Or like the health and mana regen. Like there are just a lot of little things that wouldn't have popped up. But what's been very clear to me, and Ian said this a number of times, is that they're still open to listening to the community. And I think doing something this far out was a very good way to talk to the community and say, hey guys, we know that your input matters. This is a whole different thing. We're doing something completely different from what we normally do. So we are still open to suggestions and open to interpretation, and like we want your input. I think that was important.
Okay. I have a question for Josh.
Yeah, go for it.
Do you think that this was maybe released at this time so they could introduce potentially controversial changes to soften the community to them? For example, sharding, things that they know will have to go in, but they know the community is very, very against.
No, and I'll tell you why. I feel like this wasn't planned in terms of timing and in terms of doing it, sort of dropping in the Trojan horse by way of the demo. And here's why. It seemed to be something that they could have delivered the news slightly differently. Like, one of those things people have already talked about is that if they were giving us this demo and they already told us what was coming with the demo in terms of, hey guys, hope you enjoy the demo next week. You're going to be leveling 15 to 19 in these 2 zones. We've got a long way to go, blah, blah, blah. They could have thrown in that same post. By the way, you're going to see some sharding, which will help alleviate the burden on the servers. And I think if they had dropped the news a little bit early, people would not have freaked out as much, and it would not have been as big a deal as it was through BlizzCon and in the days that have now followed. However, they've put it in the game. People noticed straight away. It became a big deal. They've then had to throw water on the fire PR-wise and actually address it quite directly in the panels and the Q&A that followed. So I don't think this was actually by design. I mean, in terms of, I don't think they're trying to sneak it in and gauge our reaction. Or 2, I don't think they've brazenly thrown it in our faces to see if we have an adverse reaction or not. I think that that's just the way in which they basically use their servers now. Blizzard uses sharding. That's how they balance things in terms of not setting their servers on fire. And then to see the backlash come from the vanilla community, I think that the amount of backlash probably took them a little bit by surprise. Again, we're talking about a company that seemed very surprised by the reaction that Diablo Immortal got at BlizzCon. So, we're talking about how in tune they are with what their customers want. For them not to realize that Classic fans would maybe go bananas about sharding was a little bit of a miscalculation on their behalf. So no, I don't think it was planned. And I think this is now all a little bit of damage control on their part. Ian did very well in answering those concerns in a relatively short turnaround time, but it really will be interesting to see what goes forward from here. My biggest problem with all this, and sorry, I'm ranting now, but I'll turn to you guys again soon. My biggest problem with all of this is that we have been sold this product over the last year with the tagline of "we are re-delivering the vanilla experience to you." And that has been hammered home by J. Allen Brack, by Ian Hazzikostas in multiple appearances over the last 12 months. And then in delivering this vanilla experience again to us, they also tag sharding along for the ride. I think it just flies in the face of what they're trying to say, sell us. And it seems odd that you just talked about, these developers seem so in love with Classic and it feels like we've got the right guys on board, yet we still have sharding. So it's kind of like, I don't really know if they are completely on board with re-delivering the vanilla experience. Now, I appreciate that they have told us, hey, sharding exists for a reason. Technically, we have to do it. And in this same episode that you'll hear this call, I've gone through all the sort of bad situations that they had to choose between in terms of queues, sharding, higher realm populations, or what have you. They were stuck between a rock and a hard place, and I don't know, they chose the option that I wasn't happy with, which, I'll still play the game, but if they do it for beyond the first few weeks, I'll be a little upset, to be honest with you. But what do you guys think of that?
Well, for me at least, I think of, first off, you mentioned them really going for sort of that historical accuracy. Ian mentioned that. And for me, there's a part of it that with the sharding and with some of the other things, I'm definitely a fan of just them doing fully everything as it was. But I also understand what they're doing in the sense of, people have talked about it being like a museum. And if you think of, say, if you go to a museum to see an exhibit on mummies or King Tut or something, they're going to do their best to really, to show the mummies, to show what it's like, to describe the process, and to really try to put you, a lot of museums will have dim lights and interesting little sets to make it feel right. But what they're not going to do is make it actually be like a tomb that you're walking into, really cramped and muggy or maybe really cold and dry. I don't know what it's like being entombed, to be honest. But because they understand that, hey, people want to go to the museum, they want to see what this is like, experiencing it, but they also want a cafe nearby to get something to eat. I know that's a weird analogy, maybe a little bit, but that's how I'm kind of viewing it. It's it's going to be very close, but I also understand the need to bring in some of the stuff from modern day. And I really honestly think they're doing their best, but that's just my take.
You know what else is part of the authentic museum experience, though, TianSG? Queues.
Yeah, that's true. It does depend on the museum you go to. That's very true.
Sorry, I'm just messing with you.
Okay with the limited. Oh, sorry.
No, go for it, Sommerlin.
I'm okay with limited use of sharding in the starting zones. I just kind of wish that I had known that they were going to do that before playing the beta, because I had the same issue that I know a lot of people in the Discord had, where we were sort of picking servers that would have sort of a mid population. You didn't want to pick the lowest pop server, but you also didn't want to pick the server that, was really high population.
Yep.
But if I had known that there was going to be sharding, I just would have gone straight for the high population server so that I'd have people to play with, even after BlizzCon ended. Whereas now it's kind of I go on and because I picked sort of a lower pop server, anticipating that I would need to be fighting for mobs. Now I get on there and it's just well, I guess it's just me.
Yeah, I had the same problem. I re-rolled because I think I picked server 2 or something. When I picked it at the time, whatever, it said medium or low population. And after a couple of days still, the first day, the second day, the third day, whatever, it was a ghost town. I was playing with seeing maybe a handful of people along my experience. Now, granted, I did play during not only US times, but also when I came back to Australia, which might have been off-peak times, but still, it felt odd playing this, new demo that everyone was so excited about, and I wasn't seeing anyone. So I re-rolled onto Classic Server number 1, and that was the high pop one, and all of a sudden there's people around, which was great. So I don't know. Whether, the sharding was the reason behind me not seeing anyone and feeling a bit lonely my first time around, that might be the case. Or maybe I was just unlucky and nobody wants to play with me. I don't know, but I noticed it. And like you say, it's strange that they didn't tell us, because what was their reasoning? Did they think that we wouldn't notice? I don't know. People picked up on it straight away.
I honestly think they probably, I've worked in the entertainment industry, and I can tell you there's a lot of things that you just don't even think about. It just completely passes your mind, especially since they probably just use that technology with all their servers now. They didn't even consider it, and then it comes out and people react to it and they go, oh, son of a bitch.
Right.
Now,
Ayle, if I can just ask you, originally we were going to do a one-on-one call, and you mentioned that you had a few points about Ian Hazzikostas from Blizzcon, and he's someone that I talked about a little bit in the last episode about how impressive I found him during the duration of the convention. And, he actually was also given a lot of pertinent information to deliver to us during the panels and whatnot, when people thought, oh, maybe it'll just be, the classic team, new faces, new voices. But Ian was still heavily involved, and as I put it in the last episode, he ironically became the MVP of BlizzCon for classic fans, even though we associate him with the retail game. What did you want to say, or what did you have to bring to the table about your impressions of Ian during the convention?
Well, I don't know if a lot of people know, but he really staked his reputation in Classic originally.
Mm-hmm.
He was the guild leader the raid leader of, I think it was like a top 2 or top 3 North American horde guild, the Elitist Jerks.
That's right.
And that's how he built his reputation with Blizzard, is they did so much PTR testing and things like that. He got, as far as I can't confirm this, but this is what I've heard through the grapevine, is that they did so much testing and things for Blizzard that eventually he got offered a job there, kind of similar to how, the people from EverQuest got on.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was also one of the big voices on, I think I covered it on the show, what seems like a lifetime ago, when AQ40 was released, and he was doing all his attempts there on Cthulhu with the guild, and the theory crafting behind it, and helping to prove that it was somewhat of a mathematical impossibility to actually take down Cthulhu in his original state. That was sort of part of Ian's legend as well.
Yeah, their website back in the day was a huge hotbed for theory crafting and really kind of high level rating. And that post he made, because I played on the same server, I had seen it, he ripped Blizzard for that. Because I think the title was something like, it's mathematically impossible to kill him, Cthulhu. And then shortly thereafter, there was a bunch of changes made. And I've actually was on Vent with him a few times before back in the day.
Oh, okay.
So it's pretty funny actually, because we were on a high pop server in Alliance Guild. We were the top raid guild on Alliance, and the Green Dragons were released, and a lot of guilds needed that gear in order to progress in AQ. And now, unfortunately, because of the way Melganis was at the time, it was a high pop server. Anytime world bosses would spawn, there would be 4 or 5 guilds all going for it. And it would turn into just a giant mess. The servers would just crash, nonstop. One guild would pull, the other faction would just wipe them. And then it'd just be back and forth battles until, everybody rezzed in Westfall kind of thing. And so he actually invited our guild to talk about it on their server.
This is Validus, is that right?
It was the guild before Validus.
Oh, okay.
Validus was kind of like a super team formed for Nax. And I remember the experience. Honestly, it was the same guy. We went in there, and by the end of it, we were eating out of his hand. And we thought we had a great deal set up with them. Basically, they said, no one's getting anything from this. The servers go down and reset, and then all the bosses despawn or whatever, right? So, we're only doing this, we're only hurting ourselves. So, he proposed a deal that the first guild there to pull, they would get like an unhindered attempt. And then after that, whatever happened, happened. So we thought that was a great deal, but what we didn't know is that they were more organized than us, so they were always pulling first. So we were never able to get anything from it. But that's, the charisma and the way he ran things, And we had made this deal, and we didn't go back on it, but yeah, we didn't end up with much loot.
That's great to hear. I mentioned to you guys on the Discord that I went to obviously that World of Warcraft retail media Q&A with him there, and I asked him a question, and you guys, I think Viv was begging me to ask him if he remembered Validus. And I was going to try and grab him afterwards, but unfortunately he was whisked away. But look, if I ever talk to him, I'll definitely try and hit both yourself and Viv up for some questions for Ian about that. I'd love to get his test his memory on all of that stuff. But if I can turn to you, TianSG, what were your impressions of what Ian was saying and maybe what everyone was saying in general during the panel? Outside of the sharding and the loot trading stuff, were you happy with what they were telling us, or what were your impressions of Ian as well? You think it was a bit funny that he was the one being pushed forward as the champion of Classic?
I think it was very clear that Ian got his start in Classic, like so many of us, and he's just so clearly passionate about this, and so clearly really cares. I mean, I've seen him do some Q&As for like DFA stuff, and there are some days when you can kind of see in his eyes just like, oh my God.
Yep.
Kind of. But yeah, he just really cares. The whole team really seems to have a lot of passion for it. I mean, even just because I liked how the beginning of the panel was very like going into the nitty gritty of the process. And I like that. I will say the one thing that actually worried me the most was with all the stuff about what the mana and health regen felt like and how it felt a little bit off. There was that part when they were saying when they had just booted up 112 basically, and they were playing, and he said, I think like they were drinking too much, or they felt like it was too slow. And that was the one moment I was like, oh no, is this like a purposeful thing? Like they're upping the regen to make it a little faster? But beyond that, I mean, like I said, the passion really came through. I thought a lot of their answers were really good for the most part. So I'm, like I said, I'm really positive moving forward with it and looking forward to it next year. Especially, I was very happy to see the progression stuff. I think that was a worry for a lot of people, but that was really good.
Well, I'm so glad you've raised that, because that was my next question for Sommerlin. Now, Sommerlin, you mentioned that you're someone who's played a lot of private servers in the past. We got to see that progression timetable. Now, we don't have any dates or anything like that, but at least we got to see the stages or the phases in which they are planning on rolling things out to us. What was your take on their decisions in terms of what comes out when?
I'm not sure if I have a lot of opinions on that in particular. Just because I usually spend a lot of time leveling on private servers, but not as much time raiding.
Oh, okay.
I do know though that obviously if you've got gear that's gonna outrank what you could have had at the time that those raids originally came out, that can be a really bad thing, but I'm not sure I have a great answer for you on that one.
That's all right. No, if I let me sort of tinker the question a bit for you. Let's start with the basics. What do you think about the decision to go without battlegrounds for maybe the first few months?
Oh, I think that's necessary, because that was such a big part of Classic where, people had to kind of find their own ways to get, PvP into the game. And I would love to participate in like the, the South Shore Tarn Mill battles and all that. I think that it's necessary to put off the introduction of battlegrounds for sure.
And appreciating that, we're all a little bit older, a little bit wiser now with Classic coming out. You said that you didn't raid much on private servers in the past. When Classic comes out, are you looking to change that? Is the progression timetable something that you might get more invested in because you are planning on doing some hardcore raiding this time around?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of trusting that maybe people who have more experience on the private server side of raiding than I do, will give good feedback for that. But yeah, I guess I kind of, because when I played vanilla, I started out as a hunter, which did not turn out to be the class that I really enjoyed, which is warriors. So I always really regretted that I never got to play a warrior back in Classic. So I'm really looking forward to rectifying that when Classic comes out.
Okay. And is there any one thing that we haven't talked about yet that you heard during the panels that really stood out to you as something you were happy with or perhaps disappointed with?
Yeah, Ian really won me over when the issue came up, like at the beginning of the Q&A, when I believe it was Scott Johnson asked if anything that you do in Classic is going to result in getting rewards for retail. And I was so happy that Ian said no, because I do not want people coming into Classic purely to get things in retail. It's just depending upon what the exact requirements are for that, retail mount or transmog or whatever, you're going to get people playing who just don't have the same objectives as the people who just really want to play Classic. And I think that would just get really frustrating really fast.
Agreed. Sorry, I thought you were going to mention the Scott Johnson faux pas when he referred to retail as the real game and Ian stood up and defended Classic.
Oh man. Yeah. No worries.
What was your reaction when you saw that?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of Scott Johnson anyway, so it just kind of felt like par for the course. But okay. Yeah, I was happy to see Ian's reaction to that.
Fantastic. Ayle, I'll turn back to you. Now, we'll talk about that progression timetable. What are your thoughts on how they've divvied everything up?
I think it needs more divisions.
Yep.
I think minimum 6. Basically, I believe at the start that Dire Maul should be separated from the initial launch as well.
I agree.
The item upgrades in Dire Maul, as well as kind of how they changed the way they did stats. I played originally at release, and there wasn't really spell power on gear and things like that. And the Dire Maul patch added kind of a lot of things like that, as well as just kind of better itemization overall. And that kind of really helps, make MC a lot easier. And I think starting out, that should be split to have more of an authentic, initial MC experience.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. Now, all of you know I'm not a raider at all, but, given the work I've done on the podcast, I'm more than familiar with the gripe that, Dire Maul has a pretty big effect on MC. So, TianSG, I'll ask you, that was the first thing that stood out to me when I looked at that timetable panel. A few people have mentioned a few, interesting things from how they're looking to release everything. But first and foremost, I saw Dire Maul Phase 1 and I was scratching my head going, I'm pretty sure that's not how private servers do it. Now, not that Blizzard are beholden to do things as private servers do them, but what do you think of the choices they've made in terms of not only Dire Maul, but everything in general with release?
For the Dire Maul thing, I did some rating on private servers. I rated a lot back in vanilla, but private servers for the most part, especially like Nostalgia is one that I mostly just level. But, so I'd probably go with what Ayle is saying about Dire Maul. Again, I trust that to people who are a little bit more familiar with modern things. Because the real issue you're going to run into with like MC, especially in Ani, is that, you're going to have 16 debuff slots, which wasn't the case when those were first out. You're going to have a lot of talents that are, that have been much more optimized over the course of vanilla. At the beginning, early days, like druids were nearly useless. I love druids, so no shot at druids, but 1.1, they weren't great. A lot of classic warlocks are my class, and they were not great early days. There's a reason that every class got kind of a major update. So that's going to affect things anyways, unless they retune raids, which who knows. Overall, especially with the progression stuff, I'm a fan of them splitting it up as much as possible, because that means a longer period of time of that sounds great to me. So if they want to do, 10 different splits, with 2 months in between, great. Please go for it.
Okay. I'll wind it up and look, everyone, great point to end up on there, TianSG. And look, I've taken up too much of you guys' time as it is. I promised you I'd try and keep this to half an hour, but thank you so much to all of you for just giving some initial thoughts on what we've received over the last few days in terms of information. And I think it's so great to hear from, you know, a multitude of players of their thoughts and concerns or positive comments about everything that we've gotten. So once again, hope to hear from you all again in the future. And thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks again,
Nice
Josh.
talking to you guys.
Okay, we've got a Countdown to Classic listener on the line, and who are we speaking with?
This is MooseTheDog.
Hey, MooseTheDog, thank you so much for hitting me up. Now, I reached out to the Discord today, and I was looking for people who had some reactions or hot takes to what happened at BlizzCon, and you actually hit me up with an interesting one because you wanted to discuss loot sharing or loot trading, and you had an interesting angle on it, which is the opposite to what a lot of people have been saying. So why don't we get straight into it? Tell me what you think about loot trading and what might happen once it comes with Classic.
Absolutely. I think that ultimately loot trading is not going to change the experience for most players. I think that the instances of abuse of loot trading are not going to be all that dissimilar from the instances of abuse that we saw in vanilla with ninja looting and, sketchy master looting and stuff like that. I don't think it'll be drastically different.
Fair enough. Well, let's get into sort of the minutiae of why you feel that. Now, I should say straight off the bat, I agree with you, and I was talking in the Discord earlier about this, that it's not going to be super prevalent. I think the number of times that individual players are going to come across the abuse of the loot trading system will be minimal at best. I mean, less than a handful of times you might be the victim of some shenanigans. But my point was, when it happens, it's going to sting, and it will sting hard. No different to ninja looting, I guess, in that regard. But I am still against loot trading, very much so. I think it's not necessary. It's not something that people were crying out for. And the hypothetical I put out there was, if they didn't give us loot trading, there wasn't one Classic fan that was going to say, hey, Goober, where's the loot trading? Like, I just don't think that outcry would have come. So tell me why you think it won't be abused by the player base.
So yeah, I would say I absolutely agree with you. I think that in some ways it is a solution to a problem that doesn't really exist. I don't think that there was significant instances of people misclicking. It happened once in a while. But I think that the reaction that we're seeing from people that are just so opposed to it, again, is they're reacting to a problem that is not going to exist. I think that whether they implement loot trading or not, it would, in the end, it would net out to be a wash. So I think that we as players don't see a problem. But for Blizzard, there is a problem, right? They want to obviously be able to reduce those tickets, reduce the time spent on stuff like that. So they are solving their problem. And I understand that people might see that as greedy or might be upset about that. But at the end of the day, they've got to do what they've got to do. And I think that for players to feel that this is drastically going to change the game, is a bit of an overreaction. And I say that in the sense of, if you really think about the composition of parties, how people normally, party up for, instances or for raids, especially when you look at like a 5-man group composition, people already avoid groups where they're going to be grouped with other players that might be rolling for the loot that they want. If I'm a warrior, I'm not going to join a group with 4 other warriors. I'm already avoiding that. And even, I'm going to avoid hunters because hunters are going to roll on everything. But I think that, if you look at the typical group composition for a 5-man, you've got a priest, you've got a warrior, or maybe you have some other sort of healer, but you've got your healer, you've got your tank, and then you've got your 3 DPS, and they're usually varied enough that if someone were to be abusing this, if someone were to have the rest of the group roll on the item for them to try and increase their chance, it would be so evident, it would be so obvious and so blatant, that you would just put that person on, those people on blast on the forums like we used to do with ninja looters, and the community would handle it. And I think that ultimately everyone talks about how amazing the community was and how it was such a community-driven game. And that community solved the problems in the past, and I think it'll solve these problems, any problems that would arise from loot trading.
Well, you mentioned, obviously the joke about everything being a hunter item and hunters being involved perhaps in this instance of loot trading. But let me push the following hypothetical on you, where one of the things that I've been saying that isn't getting talked about as much with the loot trading situation is that, yes, we all know that, it creates that situation where your friends can now roll on items for you, thus increasing your chances of winning a roll against one other person, blah, blah, blah. But the other side of the fallout of deciding to go with loot trading is something that is just as problematic in my eyes, even though it's not being talked about as much. And that's that it's left the door ajar to a little bit of further harassment by players. And I would pitch this scenario to you when I say, you're a hunter. You have just rolled on an item that you have deemed to be a hunter item. Let's say that you won that roll against, I don't know, a warrior, a rogue, whatever, who were going against you and felt that their class was perhaps more deserving of this item, and they disagreed that it was a hunter item. Regardless of who's right and who's wrong, let's say the hunter wins the roll. Now, with 2-hour windows being available for loot trading, it's not over. Quite frankly, in that group's mind, there is still a window of opportunity within which to perhaps convince or pry that item from the winning roller's hands. In that, you could now start to send a bunch of messages their way, a few whispers going, hey buddy, come on, you shouldn't have that. That should go to my class. Do the right thing. Don't be that guy, so forth and so forth. Now, I know you can just block people and that's all fine, but my point is that once you've won a roll, that should end it. But this doesn't end it. It leaves a little bit more of a foot in the door for dickheads, I guess, if to put it one way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think that in a sense that would happen anyway. Even if you didn't have loot trading, if someone felt that you rolled on the item that they deserved and that you didn't, they're going to get up in your face about it anyway. Even if it was permanent, you'd still be getting whispers from people saying, hey man, that was a dick move, and the group would call you out and people would put you on blast in the forums and in the general chat and everything. I mean, whether you could trade the item or not, if someone feels wronged, they're going to make it known. In either instance, whether it would increase because there's sort of some incentive for them to harass you into trading it, maybe, but I don't know that it really would. I think that, if someone thinks you're ninjaing their loot, they're gonna call you a ninja and they're gonna annoy you and they're gonna argue with you regardless of if you can trade it to them or not.
Fair enough. Yeah, it was something that struck me the other day where I just thought it might be a bit more frequent or amplified if people had that knowledge that there's a 1% chance that they could still get this item if they guilt someone into submission, into handing it over or something like that. But look, at the end of the day, you are right. It's not that dissimilar to the system we already have in place. I guess it's just, cut from a different cloth, if you will. But I'll pitch another scenario to you, and you mentioned this obviously in your initial answer when this is the main thing that people are sort of crying out about, where they talk about if you are the pickup member of a group and you're there with fellow guildies and you're just filling in the final slot or what have you on a dungeon run, or, you've got a couple of mates together or what have you, the whole point of them banding together, rolling on the same item to increase the percentage chance that their friend gets the item over the random person. So you're saying it's going to be so obvious that when that happens. is there not instances where it won't be as obvious, where it's something like a recipe? Sorry, not a recipe. There can go on the auction house. You know, something like a trinket that might be applicable to a number of classes that they could all roll on, even though they might already have it somewhere. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are certainly going to be a few very specific instances or very specific group compositions where you could sort of possibly pull off the perfect crime. And I will say this, I'm not an advocate of loot trading. I think that the system that we have is fine, but I think when it comes to sort of the changes versus no changes, I lean towards no changes, but every time I hear, I try and consider, will this fundamentally change my experience? And if the answer is no, then I'm not going to get up in arms about it. And so I think that how Blizzard decides to implement this is really important. And that's why I say I just think that people are kind of overreacting. I think that if tomorrow they came out and said we're not doing loot trading, I would say great. You know, I don't think we need it, but I understand why they want to do it. So I think that one thing that they would have to implement in how they put this into practice would be a notification. If someone trades that item, everyone in the party gets a notification, right? You have a 1 or 2 hour window. If you're still logged in, you get like a little whisper or something like that. Something pops up in your chat, or if you're not logged in, it comes in the mail. So you can see that they need to be transparent with it. So I think that number one would really start to disincentivize people from abusing the loot trading, because then that's when the community steps in, because someone says, all right, you know, this hunter said he really needed this weapon, blah, 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 blah. And, then, you know, an hour later he traded it to the warrior. So now I put that screenshot of the piece of mail or the notification on the community forums, and that person gets blacklisted, just like we used to do with ninja looters. I think the other thing that they could implement that would help to reduce, abuse of the system would be that you can only trade the item once and only to the second highest roller. So if you are in a party of 5 people, by actually having more people roll for you, you actually lessen your chance of getting it. Because if you just roll head to head with that one other person that wanted it, you have a 50-50 shot. But if you're rolling with 5 people and you have to be either number 1 or number 2 out of 5, you have a much lower shot at getting it. Because 2 out of 5 is less than 1 out of 2. So I think that if they only allowed it to be traded to that second person, you start to disincentivize people from abusing that system. And then combine that with a notification, it would be really, really hard, like I said, to pull off the sort of perfect crime.
That's some phenomenal suggestions there, and I have to be honest, that's not something that I've come across yet. I really do congratulate you, particularly for that first suggestion. I think is fantastic in terms of if there were some kind of automated notification that something had been traded, then knowing that it was all open and transparent, it might dissuade some people from doing it if they were being nefarious through their actions. So that's a really good bit of food for thought there. I do enjoy that one. Now, I guess the next point that I'll take you to that I'd love to hear you comment on is that you talked about, look, there are going to be certain scenarios where you could theoretically get away with the perfect crime, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it because no one will ever know. And I'll run a story by you that, frequent users of the Discord might be aware of that you may not have heard yet if you're relatively new to the Discord. Countdown to Classic Discord regular 7 Winters has a couple of times told a story about, instances back in vanilla where he would run Stratholme and, he was playing a paladin and he already had the Lightforge gloves. And if they dropped, he would simply, unequip them, roll on them, take them and sell them on the auction house. It's, the perfect crime. Instances like that might be the kind of scenarios where the loot trading thing comes back into the equation for, once again, talk about getting away with it clean, where you simply just unequip things before you go into the instance, or you unequip them at the moment that the rolling happens, and you get your buddies to roll on things for you, or everyone goes in on it, and you're just like, well, I need it. And they all point to him and say, look, he clearly needs it. Inspect him. Trade. Do you know what I mean?
So I guess you're talking about a bind on equip item, not a bind on pickup item.
Oh, sorry. Yes. No.
So
I realized
something you could auction.
Sorry. Yes. I realized that story involves a BOE item, but in terms of simply unequipping something you have on, and then a BOP drops, and then you could effectively say, well, I don't have that item. So, well, actually, no. You're right.
People can do that with or without loot trading.
You're right. I've talked myself into realizing how stupid what I'm saying is now. So don't worry about that.
Well, so I think if I'm understanding the story correctly, I think that the concern would be a situation where you have a group, maybe you have a group that has, a handful of cloth wares in it. So a cloth item drops, and let's say you have 3 cloth wares, and 2 of them have that item or better. So they don't actually need it, and they're going to collude with their friend who does need it to try and get them more rolls.
Yeah.
I think first and foremost, you have to find people who are willing to take the risk of ruining their reputation, that also have the same item or better and are willing to unequip it and use something else that they have in their bag. So that's already kind of a convoluted situation.
Yep.
Because I think more likely what happens is in that group, the piece of cloth drops and all those people actually do need it. Not a lot of people run instances when there's no incentive for them to do it. And when they do, it's usually to help a guildie out, and they're not gonna, be screwing their guildie over. So I think that what more likely would happen is that you have 3 cloth wares and something drops, and they said, oh, we're gonna all help each other out. But really, if they're already those kind of dishonest people that are going to be colluding, then what's to stop them from screwing each other over and all rolling on it?
Yeah.
And then keeping it. So yeah, I think that if it's implemented in a way that there is some transparency, that really putting your reputation on the line is going to dissuade people from doing it. You get so little gain, for such a high risk. If it's implemented properly, that people just are going to avoid it. And if it starts being very prevalent, people will see the pattern and avoid groups like that. So if it turns out that, you're getting 4 cloth wares in a group together, well, even then, it's just odd, because if you get 4 cloth wares in a group together, the warrior who's tanking isn't going to roll on cloth stuff without someone calling them out on it. And, then you have to have 1 cloth wearer who, actually needs the item and is not being colluded on. So it only leaves you 3 people left to collude. And one of those people is the one that is, wants the item, and the other 2 are helping them out. If that would be the only way to really abuse that in a 5-man group. And if that really starts happening, then people just will not join groups that have 4 cloth wearers or 4 leather wearers, or, however, they'll see that pattern. Now, I do think that, and I haven't really gamed out the scenarios and the statistics on the 15 to 20-man groups. I do think there you could potentially see a little bit more abuse. Like I said, I'm not sure. I haven't gone through the scenarios enough to really say definitively. But in 40-mans, not a lot of people are pugging 40-mans, at least not right off the bat. And even if you are, that's a high risk situation in terms of ninja looting and master looters giving stuff away to the wrong people. So I think really it's going to be in the 5-man. And I think another advantage too, I said that I understand why Blizzard is doing this, because they want to, reduce GM tickets, reduce the amount of time people are working on researching these type of issues when they feel they can kind of automate it and let the community handle it. The other thing is that it does significantly reduce the amount of time it takes. And when you're looking at the 5-man groups, when you're looking at leveling, if it takes 5 days for me to get that item, I don't need it anymore. You know, I've leveled far beyond that, the usefulness of that item. So where I do have a little more concern would be end game like 15 mans, you know, because then you would have a situation where you have a couple people from each class who could kind of, you know, like you said, disequip something and kind of collude and kind of fly under the radar a little bit. But again, you need so many people to increase your chances to a point that it's worth doing, that it would throw up red flags if you start seeing, you know, a 15-man group with like 7 warriors in it. So I just think that the abuse would be so obvious, that the community would be able to handle it.
Right. Well, I guess as you were talking as well, I realized sort of what I was trying to say, and you've explained it well for me. You've cleaned up well for me as well, as I made that horrible example before. But yes, when you're talking about, like, you know, when you start to get to end game content, and you talk about things like, I don't know, a pickup group going through Zul'Gurub or something, right? And you've got, I don't know, 2 paladins who are buddies and 1 priest. Let's say those paladins are rolling on cloth gear because they're playing holy or what have you. And then all of a sudden something drops, and then they say to each other, one's got the item, the other doesn't. They want to help their buddy out, but the priest wants it too. Hey mate, I'll unequip mine. It'll look like we both don't have it. Well, all 3 of us will roll of it and roll on it, and hopefully one of the 2 of us gets it instead of this priest. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But again, like I said, if you can only give it to the person with the second highest roll, then you actually, the more people you get to roll for you, the lower your chances get.
Oh no, I agree with you. Every point you've made has been fantastic, and actually you're bringing me around already on the issue. But I guess I'm just trying to convince myself that I'm not an idiot, that these scenarios could potentially happen.
And like I said, I do think that any system that is implemented people will find ways to abuse anything. I just don't think, I think that there's been this sort of, I don't want to say knee-jerk reaction, but very visceral reaction to the loot trading. And I think that some of that has just sort of become ingrained with the community. You know, people don't want changes, and I totally get that. So like anything that's a change is just inherently bad. But I think when you look a little bit deeper and you kind of game it out and look at the scenarios and look at sort of statistically how it might work out, it really isn't going to affect things as negatively as people would sort of assume off the bat.
I think you're right. In terms of the loot trading, whilst I'm against it, I think the amount of vitriol that came from it was a little bit unexpected. People really lost their shit over this, and whilst I don't
that really surprised me.
Yeah, and well, I think it's just because it was so unexpected. But I'll say this much: whilst you may be right that it might have been a little bit of an overreaction, I still think it really warranted some kind of a reaction.
Sure, I think everything that's coming out warrants discussion. You know, I mean, I'm the type of person that really does like to go on Reddit or go on the forums or go in the Discord and listen to all the different things people say, because, you know, 9 times out of 10, I'm seeing stuff that I never thought of. And, you know, whether it's loot trading or sharding or, you know, graphic changes or anything, you know, it's really interesting to see what other people have to say. And I think it always merits a discussion. But what I do think is that, that discussion should be really based around how does this ultimately affect the experience, and not just, is this different or is this the same? I think that everything merits sort of like a, you know, peeling back the layers of the onion and really trying to get to the essence of it, that level of discussion. And I think that's important. And that's why I like the show. I like the Discord. I think that a lot of the people, in the classic community, want to have those discussions and want to try and, figure it all out and be honest about it. Be open-minded about it. And I will say this too. I see a lot of people that say, I don't trust Blizzard, or this community doesn't trust Blizzard. And I have to say, I personally don't have that feeling towards Blizzard, because the only game I have ever played from Blizzard is vanilla World of Warcraft. I played it for 1 year. And that's the only experience I have, with Blizzard. So I don't have that level of distrust. And I think maybe if I had some of the experiences some other people have had, I would look at this differently and think about it differently, but I don't. And so this is how I approach it.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up that point about needing to sort of see and hear all the discussions. And I can assure you that this discussion that we're having right now, you have already talked me off the ledge a little bit. Like, I'm still not happy that loot trading is in there, simply because I feel it was just unnecessary. It wasn't in vanilla, and I know why Blizzard is doing it. You've explained that, and I do realize they said that at the time from a sort of resources point of view, in terms of not wanting to pay much attention to us and devote more GMs to doing things and putting in tickets when they don't have to. But you've made me feel a lot better about the number of times you might come across it, and the amount of effort that people would have to go through in order to effectively pull off that great heist job. So thank you so much for that. And that's why I was so keen for this call, just to get the other point of view. When obviously I could, the opposing point of views right now would be a dime a dozen in terms of people getting very, very angry about why loot trading shouldn't be there. While I've got you though, I might turn just quickly to the other sort of very controversial topic that came up from BlizzCon, which is that of sharding. Do you have any strong thoughts one way or another on the implementation of sharding in Classic?
I mean, yeah, I don't like it. I don't want it. If it is really for, those first 2 weeks in the first 10 levels in that first zone, I mean, again, I don't know that it'll fundamentally change my experience. And even if it does, again, it will be for 2 weeks it changes my experience. And then for the rest of eternity that I get to play Classic WoW, it won't. So, I mean, it's not a deal breaker for me. I think that's another one that really, that's an issue that does merit that, again, that level of discussion of really gaming out all the scenarios and, reading on the forums and stuff. There have been a lot of people that have said, well, if we don't do sharding, we'll have queues, or we'll, have server population issues. And there, at the end of the day, I think that, population is just a really difficult question for Blizzard to have to deal with. And I don't think that really any answer is a good answer. I think it's easy to say, oh, I'd be fine with queues. I dealt with it back then. But I mean, in reality, I would be very unhappy if I had to sit in a queue for hours at a time. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, like the sharding, if it really is what they say, if it's the first 10 levels in the first zone, it's not going to be a deal breaker for me. If they can come up with a better way to do it, and still, have healthy populations and servers, I'm fine with that too. I do think that in the long run, low population servers are more detrimental to my overall experience. Oh, well, let me say this. Some people like low population servers. So, if that's your thing, more power to you. But I think that, that healthy server population is more important to my long-term overall experience with Classic WoW than 2 weeks of sharding, is. But yeah, that's one that I wish I had the answer. Then maybe Blizzard would hire me. But yeah, I don't have a whole lot of thoughts on that. I think it kind of is what it is. And I hope it's just as limited as possible.
No, it's a great point that you've made in terms of there is no right answer. Blizzard was kind of fucked either way, with whatever they went with here. And in this episode that this call will be published in, I will have gone over all the ways in which Blizzard was presented with some pretty ordinary choices and had to pick the best of a bad bunch. But in terms of queue times, I mean, the one thing that I've stated is that I'm fine with queue times. That's how we had it back in vanilla. Just do that again. Who cares? But you bring up a good point. And I must say, maybe I'm spoiled, but I don't remember large queue times. Back in vanilla, maybe I got like 15, 20-minute queue times sometimes. But for the most part, you know, it was a pretty crisp login experience. And if I did get a queue, then so what? I went and made a sandwich and I'd come back and the game was there ready to go. Now, I appreciate that people say, well, fuck that. I'm paying for a game. That means instant access. But it's just something where I never had to experience hour plus 2 hour, 3 hour long queues. I don't know how it was back in the day. Are you aware of, did you go through it, or are you aware of, were those exceptionally long queues where that's why queuing is a bad idea because you could wait up to 2 hours to get into the game?
You know, I didn't. I was on a pretty low population server. That's why I want to kind of try and avoid that. I want to be on like a medium population server, in Classic. So I didn't experience a lot of queue times. Like you said, you know, it was 5 to 15 minutes, and that's not terribly unreasonable. But I mean, I have heard horror stories about much longer than that. And I certainly think that at launch, it is going to be much worse than those 5 or 15 minute waits. And I also think that our attention spans now are shorter than they were 12 years ago. Just because, you know, the internet was slower back then. Everything we did on computers took longer back then, and you did wait for stuff, you know. We are so conditioned now for everything to be instantaneous and to have, you know, everything at our fingertips on our smartphones and stuff like that. I think that the reality of it is, if I came home from a long day at work and I went to log in and I saw, honestly, even 15 minutes, I would be frustrated. I would deal with it. I wouldn't stop playing the game because of it, but I would be frustrated about it. And certainly if it was like an hour or 2 hours, I would be really upset about it. I think too, like, you know, it'll be interesting to see the demographics of who plays Classic, but you know, if it's primarily people who are coming back that played it when it was released, we have less time now. So those queues are gonna sting a little bit more, just because, you know, jobs and families and all that stuff. 15 minutes to a kid in high school or a kid in college is a lot different than 15 minutes to an adult. I think it's easy to say I'm okay with queues, and then, you know, when it happens to be screaming at your computer screen.
That's a great point regarding time being a lot more valuable to a lot of people these days. Well, look, MooseTheDog, I really can't thank you enough for being sort of so level-headed during this call and providing the opposing view for people to consider and really take away as food for thought. So thank you so much for calling into Countdown to Classic.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And that's everything from those calls for now. I really do hope you all enjoyed those, and another big thank you to everyone who called in for those chats. The one thing I'd love to ask of all of you now is that if you do happen to like those group calls and you'd like to hear more of them on the show as opposed to the one-on-one chats, then please do let me know by commenting on the show's Reddit post, in the Discord, on the Countdown website, or email me and let me know how you would like the show to sound moving forward. Also, if you think you'd like to get involved in a chat just like that, or perhaps you and a few mates can form a party and call into the show together, then please don't be shy in contacting me via the show's Discord, with the link to that sitting there in the show notes for you, or it's on the website as well. Or you can contact me via email at feedback@countdowntoclassic.com. I would love to hear from more individuals or or a group of friends who have something they want to talk about that is unique to them or that we haven't touched on through the show at any stage yet. So please don't be shy. Everyone that has called in has had a great time, and as you can hear, I don't bite. So take the plunge, please. If it's not obvious by now, Countdown to Classic is a show made by the community for the community, and I'll definitely do what I can to bring you more of that in the future. So maybe we'll have a bit of a mix of group calls and individual ones going forward. But stay tuned next week for more listener calls, including a great call with Jason from the Starting Zone podcast and Def Camp of Def Camp and Melderon TV, all about the relationship between heavy metal and World of Warcraft. And also we've got some calls coming on learning languages through World of Warcraft, and maybe the final say on whether or not there really was any war in the World of Warcraft. Hot take alert for that one. Now, that's the show for the day, everyone, but just before I let you go, I just want to shout out to some very dedicated patrons of Countdown to Classic. So, shout out to Flozy B, Palfurus, Rarebit, Romani, Tsunami, The Anton, Wilson Ma, and Velarco. Thank you so much for your phenomenal support of the show. Countdown to Classic would not be the same without you. And also, a big thank you to supporters Hurlbert, Tim B, Tim S, Minoru, Connor C, Michael H, John H.C, Damien A, Randall H, Myrtle Banks, and Zudamos, as always. And I must say sorry to a few of you mentioned there. I was absolutely remiss in not seeing your names pop up on Patreon and should have been shouting you out for the last few episodes or so, but I haven't been. So please do accept my humblest apologies. I'll be sure to try to keep a better eye on it from here on. But that's it from me for the day. So, signing off from Home Sweet Home Down Under. Have a great rest of the week, everyone. I'll see you next time.